Chapter 701. Tiamat 1. Radiant Dragon Tiamat, guardian of the Viserion family. The knowledge hit me like a revelation as I stared up at the massive form descending from the star-filled sky. In this world, the four mythical beasts held dominion over their respective regions. Phoenixes of the north, dragons of the south, basilisks of the west, and cheilants of the center and east. And now, I was witnessing one of these legendary beings in the flesh. Not just any dragon, but one at the absolute peak of her power, radiant rank, the same level Luna had possessed before her sealing. Tiamat. Tiamat. Luna's voice whispered in my mind. And I was struck by the unprecedented complexity of emotions flooding through our bond. Reverence that bordered on worship. Respect that acknowledged absolute supremacy. And beneath it all, a confusion that surpassed my own. The torrent of feelings from Luna was overwhelming in its intensity. In all our time together, I had never felt her this emotionally affected by anything. It was as if seeing Tiamat had awakened something fundamental within her, memories or instincts that transcended her current sealed state. The massive dragon began to descend more rapidly, her obsidian scales catching and reflecting the moonlight like liquid shadow. As she approached the palace's main courtyard, her form began to shimmer and contract, the impossible bulk of her true shape condensing into something more manageable. By the time she touched down on the stones, Tiamat had assumed her human form. She stood perhaps 6 feet tall, with midnight black hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and eyes that held the deep crimson of dragon fire. Her features were sharp and elegant, ageless in the way that only truly ancient beings could achieve. She wore a simple dress of dark silk that somehow managed to convey more majesty than any royal regalia could have accomplished. But it was the aura of power surrounding her that truly marked her as something beyond mortal comprehension. The very air seemed to bend around her presence, and I could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on the courtyard like a physical force. Every guard in sight immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in absolute deference. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of more footsteps approaching rapidly. Prince Ian burst through the courtyard entrance, his flame-red hair disheveled. Beside him came a woman I immediately recognized as Queen Lyralii Viserion, Ian's mother, whose 9-star Nyx tiger bloodline was evident in the predatory grace of her movements and the subtle golden striping that marked her auburn hair. Both mother and son were clearly dressed in haste, yet neither hesitated for even a moment before dropping into deep, respectful bows. "Great Guardian," Queen Lyralii said, her voice carrying the formal cadence of protocol. "You honor us with your presence. How may the House of Viserion serve you?" I found myself studying the dynamics at play with growing understanding. Tiamat's influence clearly superseded even that of King Marcus himself, Ian's father and ruler of the southern continent. For over 1,000 years, she had served as protector and guide to the beast bloodline families and the southern continent, her wisdom and power ensuring their survival through countless crises and conflicts, especially against the abyssal kin. This wasn't just respect for a powerful ally. This was the reverence owed to a being who had literally shaped the history of their civilization. What confused me, however, was the sensation I was picking up from Tiamat herself. Despite her awesome power and the fearful deference she commanded, there was something about her presence that felt warm, maternal even, like being in the presence of a protective mother rather than an ancient force of destruction. The contradiction between her overwhelming authority and this underlying gentleness left me uncertain how to interpret her sudden appearance. Tiamat's crimson eyes swept across the assembled figures before settling on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. When she spoke, her voice carried the same warmth I had sensed in her aura, though it was underlaid with power that could have shattered mountains. "Arthur Nightingale," she said, and my name on her lips sounded like both blessing and judgment. "I wish to speak with you privately." The courtyard fell into even deeper silence as everyone present processed the implications of her words. Even in human form, Tiamat commanded attention like a force of nature, and her specific interest in me was clearly significant beyond anything the Viserions had anticipated. Luna's emotional turbulence intensified through our bond, and I could feel her struggling with recognition and longing that she couldn't quite articulate. Whatever connection existed between cheilants and dragons, it ran deeper than simple mythical beast kinship. "Of course, Great Guardian," I replied, offering the respectful bow that protocol demanded while trying to project calm confidence. "I am at your disposal." Tiamat's lips curved in what might have been a smile, though it held depths I couldn't fathom. Her gaze shifted momentarily to encompass Seraphina and Reka, and then toward the palace wing where Luna slept. "Come with me," she said as Mana moved around her like excited servants attending their queen. I felt myself lifted effortlessly by invisible forces, but instead of the crushing grip I might have expected, it felt like being wrapped in the softest blanket imaginable. It was a profoundly strange sensation, being completely at the mercy of overwhelming power that somehow felt protective rather than threatening. "Let's go," Tiamat said as she launched into the sky in her human form with me floating beside her. After reaching a certain altitude, reality began to warp around us, space folding like origami until the familiar sensation of teleportation swept through my senses. I blinked and opened my eyes to find myself standing in what could only be described as a cathedral carved from living stone. Tiamat's dragon lair stretched before me in impossible grandeur. The cavern was vast enough to house several city blocks, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to move with their own inner light. Crystalline formations jutted from every surface, their faceted edges catching and amplifying light from sources I couldn't identify. Rivers of what appeared to be liquid starlight flowed through channels carved into the floor, their gentle babbling the only sound in the profound silence. Ancient tapestries hung from natural stone pillars, each one depicting scenes of historical significance that I recognized from legends and myths. Treasure didn't fill the space as dragon lairs were often portrayed. Instead, the lair felt more like a sanctuary, a place of meditation and ancient wisdom. At the center of it all stood a simple throne carved from a single massive crystal, its surface reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Welcome to my lair, Arthur Nightingale," Tiamat said, her voice echoing softly off the crystalline walls. "Only 4 humans have come here before you. Philandris Viserion, Julius Slatemark, Liam Kagu, and Arthur Nightingale." The names hit me like physical blows. Philandris Viserion, the founder of the Viserion family and first person to successfully integrate the blood of a mythical creature, allowing him to dominate the southern continent's beast bloodline families. Julius Slatemark, the founder of the Slatemark Empire in the central continent who had bonded with Luna 1,000 years ago. And Liam Kagu, the first hero who had slain the heavenly demon and committed genocide against vampires almost 200 years ago. But wait, she had said Arthur Nightingale was the 4th person, not that I was the 4th. The distinction sent chills down my spine. I felt Luna's overwhelming desire to manifest, so I allowed her to take physical form. She appeared in her familiar 5-year-old shape, her power constrained by my current ascendant rank limitations, her golden eyes wide with wonder as she took in the magnificent surroundings. "Dear, you have grown so much," Tiamat smiled warmly as she approached Luna and gently patted her head like she was greeting a beloved child. Luna typically despised being treated like a child. Her ancient pride rebelled against such casual contact. But instead of her usual indignant protests, Luna simply tilted her head down, her cheeks reddening as she accepted Tiamat's affectionate gesture with something approaching shy pleasure. "I get it now," I thought, the pieces clicking into place. Tiamat was clearly a maternal figure to Luna, someone who had cared for her in ages past. But if Luna was over 1,000 years old, exactly how ancient was Tiamat? "It's rude to think about a lady's age," Tiamat said with gentle amusement, causing me to look away and scratch my cheek in embarrassment. "How do you find my lair?" she asked as I took in the breathtaking surroundings. "It's magnificent," I said honestly, my voice carrying genuine awe. "Nothing like the treasure hoards depicted in stories. This feels more like a temple than a dragon's den." "Wisdom is the greatest treasure," Tiamat replied, moving to stand beside her crystal throne. "Material wealth is fleeting, but knowledge endures across the ages." She gestured for me to approach, her crimson eyes holding depths that seemed to contain the weight of millennia. Luna remained close to my side, still basking in the warm maternal presence that Tiamat projected. She moved closer, her presence both comforting and overwhelming. "You see, Arthur Nightingale, you are not the first person to bear that name and walk this path. The 4th visitor to my lair was another Arthur Nightingale, one who came here seeking answers in what you might call the previous timeline." Chapter 702. Tiamat, 2. I inhaled sharply at Tiamat's words, though the revelation didn't shock me as much as it might have. The possibility had been gnawing at the edges of my consciousness for years, and Isolde's cryptic comments had practically confirmed my suspicions. But now I knew it with absolute certainty. The original Arthur was a regressor, and this was a different timeline, a new iteration of events that had somehow gone wrong before. "Your mind is truly sharp," Tiamat nodded with approval, her crimson eyes seeming to read my thoughts as easily as an open book. "Isolde already told you much of this anyway, so the revelation itself matters little. We were able to create a method to edit the past through the use of regression magic." I nodded, my mind racing through the implications. How many times had this cycle repeated? How many versions of Arthur Nightingale had walked this path before me? "But I am not here merely to confirm what you already suspected," Tiamat continued, her expression growing more serious. "I wouldn't have brought you all the way to my lair just for that. I'm here to warn you about something that will happen as a direct consequence of your choices." "My choices?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew where this was heading. "You saved your daughter and removed the body aspect of the heavenly demon from her physical form," Tiamat said, her voice carrying the weight of cosmic significance. "However, your gray power, remarkable though it was, wasn't dense enough to truly destroy something so fundamentally woven into reality. Instead, the body aspect has dispersed and will eventually reconstitute itself somewhere in this world." My eyes widened in horror as the full implications hit me. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "By my calculations, approximately 4 years," Tiamat replied with the clinical precision of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "And when the body aspect fully manifests again, it will trigger the second calamity." I sucked in a sharp breath as Luna's form beside me trembled with shock and fear. The Cheelant's golden eyes were wide with the terror of someone who understood exactly what a second calamity would mean. Tiamat's expression grew even more grave. "The second calamity is not something this world can overcome through conventional means. The first nearly destroyed everything despite the combined efforts of every major power. A second occurrence would be final. For that level of threat, you need to reach the level of a demigod within 4 years. The level of a demigod. Instantly, my mind flashed back to that final moment with my master, the strike that had split the very sky, the technique that had transcended normal magical understanding and touched something approaching divine authority. That was the benchmark I needed to reach. So far, I thought despairingly, the gap between my current high ascendant rank power and true demigod status was vast beyond imagination. Even with accelerated advancement, reaching that level in 4 years seemed almost impossible. I know, Tiamat said, once again reading my thoughts with disturbing ease. The path from radiant rank to demigod is impossible for even the most gifted individuals. But you have surpassed my expectations completely, which is why I have prepared something that might give you the advantage you need. She turned toward the deeper recesses of her lair, gesturing for us to follow. You've already demonstrated remarkable innovation in your magical development. Your method for 7-circle magic was inspired, creating a completely new approach that bypassed traditional limitations while achieving superior results. We walked deeper into the crystalline cavern, passing pools of what appeared to be liquid light and formations that hummed with contained power. However, Tiamat continued, developing your own methodology for 8-circle magic will be significantly more challenging. The complexity increases exponentially, and the margin for error becomes vanishingly small. 9-circle magic. She paused, her expression growing troubled. 9-circle magic would likely stall your development entirely if you attempt to innovate from scratch. The time required would exceed your 4-year deadline. We reached what appeared to be an altar carved from a single massive diamond, its surface perfectly smooth and reflecting light in impossible patterns. Resting upon it was a crystalline container holding what looked like a perfectly preserved heart, its surface gleaming with scales that shifted through every color of the spectrum. This, Tiamat said with reverence, is the heart of Bahamut the Eternal, a dragon who once stood at the absolute apex of magical understanding at radiant rank. I stared at the preserved organ with awe and a growing sense of unease. The heart pulsed with its own inner light, and I could sense the vast magical knowledge contained within its crystallized structure. She carefully lifted the container, handling it with the reverence due to a priceless artifact. I propose that you study this heart's magical resonance patterns. The knowledge within will guide your development of 8 and 9-circle techniques, allowing you to build upon foundations that took a genius millennia to perfect. And eventually? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Eventually, when you've grown strong enough to handle the strain, you will consume the heart itself, Tiamat confirmed. Bahamut's magical essence will integrate with your own, providing not just knowledge but actual enhancement to your magical capacity. I stared at the dragon's heart, understanding that this was more than just a magical artifact. It was a lifeline, the difference between success and failure in the impossible task ahead of me. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying genuine gratitude. This is beyond generous. It is necessary, Tiamat replied simply. The second calamity cannot be allowed to succeed. Too much depends on your growth, Arthur Nightingale. Not just this world, but the very concept of hope itself. As I carefully accepted the crystalline container, I felt the weight of destiny settling on my shoulders once again. For years to achieve the impossible, armed with the accumulated wisdom of a legendary dragon, and the desperate hope that love and determination could overcome even cosmic threats. The countdown to the second calamity had begun. Chapter 703, Tiamat 3. After our discussion about the second calamity and Bahamut's heart, I had expected to return to my guest quarters to process the overwhelming revelations in private. The weight of what lay ahead, reaching demigod status in 4 years to prevent an apocalypse, seemed like something that required solitary contemplation. However, that plan didn't survive contact with an 8-year-old's priorities. Instead, I found myself sitting in an ornate chair in one of the palace's most luxurious meeting rooms, my daughter Luna clinging to my side with the desperate grip of a child who had woken up to find her father missing. Her dark hair was still mussed from sleep, and her butterfly pendant caught the room's soft lighting as she pressed against me like a particularly determined koala. "Daddy, where did you go?" she had asked when the palace staff brought her to us, her voice carrying the accusatory tone of someone who had discovered a grave injustice. "I woke up and you weren't there, and Reika wasn't there, and even Princess Serafina wasn't there. I thought everyone abandoned me." "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I murmured, stroking her hair gently while trying not to laugh at her dramatic retelling. "I had to speak with someone very important. But I'm here now. You should have woken me up," she declared with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. "I'm very good at important meetings. I can sit quietly and everything." Across from us, Tiamat sat with regal composure in her human form, though her attention was entirely focused on the small golden figure curled contentedly in her lap. Luna the Qilin, my ancient, 1,000-year-old partner, was allowing herself to be petted like an oversized house cat, her usual dignity completely abandoned in favor of basking in Tiamat's maternal attention. "You know," I said through our mental link, watching the Qilin's blissful expression, "for someone who's over 1,000 years old, you're acting remarkably like a child seeking mommy's attention." "I am not a child," Luna huffed in my mind, though she made no move to leave Tiamat's lap. I am simply reconnecting with an old friend. Aha, is that what we're calling it when you purr every time she scratches behind your ears? Cheelins do not purr, Luna replied with wounded dignity, just as a distinctly purr-like sound escaped her throat when Tiamat found a particularly good spot. Of course not. That was just Cheelin rumbling. Exactly, Cheelin rumbling. A completely different and much more dignified sound. Reika and Serafina flanked me on either side, both women maintaining polite alertness despite the late hour and unusual circumstances. Though I caught Reika hiding a smile as she observed the family dynamics playing out before us. Princess Serafina, my daughter Luna announced suddenly. You have really pretty hair. It's like moonlight. Thank you, little one, Serafina replied with one of her rare genuine smiles. Your hair is quite lovely as well. Very shiny. Daddy brushes it every morning, Luna said proudly. He's getting better at braids, but sometimes they're still lopsided. I'm learning, I protested mildly. Braiding is more complicated than magical theory. That's because magical theory doesn't wiggle, Reika observed with amusement. Or complain that you're pulling too tight. Or insist that the braid needs to be princess perfect for breakfast. I added, earning a giggle from my daughter. The reason for this impromptu gathering was simple. When it had come time to leave Tiamat's lair, Luna the Cheelin had been visibly reluctant to part from the ancient dragon. After centuries of separation, being reunited with what was clearly a cherished maternal figure had awakened emotions she rarely displayed. I may have missed her a little, Luna admitted in our mental link, her voice carrying unusual vulnerability. A little? You've been attached to her lap for 2 hours. I have not been attached. I have been strategically positioned for optimal conversation participation. From someone's lap. The lap is incidental to the positioning. Tiamat, for her part, had seemed equally reluctant to end their reunion. The night is young, she had said with gentle authority that brooked no argument. And it has been far too long since I've had the pleasure of Luna's company. Perhaps we might continue our conversation in more comfortable surroundings. The Viserians, naturally, had not dared to object. Prince Ian had personally overseen the preparation of one of the palace's grandest reception rooms, complete with comfortable seating, refreshments, and what appeared to be a carefully curated selection of lunar-appropriate snacks. Is that dragon really 1,000 years old? My daughter asked in a stage whisper that was absolutely audible to everyone in the room. Several thousand, actually, Tiamat replied with amusement, though it's impolite to ask a lady her age. Oh, Luna considered this seriously. Sorry, Daddy says I'm still learning manners. You're doing wonderfully, Tiamat assured her. Much better than most young humans I've met. Really? Even better than Daddy when he was little? I never met your father when he was your age, Tiamat said carefully. But I imagine he was quite energetic. He probably was, Luna agreed sagely. He still climbs on things he shouldn't. Reika has to stop him sometimes. Reika's lips twitched. Master does have a tendency toward creative problem-solving. Is that what we're calling it? Serafina asked with dry amusement. I'm sitting right here, I pointed out. We know, all three women replied in unison, causing my daughter to dissolve into giggles. Even the child is ganging up on you, Luna the Cheelin observed with obvious entertainment. How does it feel to be outnumbered by your own family? Terrifying, I replied honestly, and somehow wonderful at the same time. As the evening progressed, I found myself watching the easy camaraderie that had developed between everyone present. Serafina had gradually relaxed from her usual composed reserve, actually laughing at my daughter's increasingly elaborate theories about dragon biology. Reika had appointed herself as the official snack distributor, ensuring everyone had tea and the small cakes the palace had provided. Daddy? Luna said suddenly, having worked her way through what appeared to be her third petit four. Are you really going to be busy? The innocent question hit like a physical blow, reminding me of the conversation that had started this whole evening. For years to reach an impossible level of power, while trying to be a father to a little girl who needed stability and attention. I'll have to work very hard, I said carefully, but I'll always make time for you, sweetheart. You're the most important thing in my life. More important than saving the world? Children are terrifyingly perceptive, Luna commented in my mind. No wonder humans find parenting so challenging. You are my world, I replied, meaning every word. Everything else I do is just to make sure you have a safe place to grow up in. Luna beamed at this answer, apparently satisfied with the logic. The night wore on with increasingly ridiculous conversations. My daughter regaled everyone with detailed explanations of her favorite games, her opinions on various palace decorations, and her theories about why dragons were probably better than horses. They can fly and breathe fire, which is much more useful. Tiamat contributed stories about the early days of the beast bloodline families, carefully edited for young ears but still fascinating. Luna the Cheelin occasionally added commentary, usually contradicting Tiamat's more diplomatic versions of historical events. Actually, Luna would say, that king was an absolute moron who nearly started 3 wars because he couldn't tell the difference between a trade agreement and a marriage proposal. Luna, Tiamat would chide gently, we don't call historical figures morons in front of children, But he was, Luna protested. He tried to marry a shipping manifest. You know? I said thoughtfully, watching my daughter giggle at the historical banter. Seeing you both together like this makes me realize something. What's that, Daddy? Luna asked, tilting her head up to look at me with curious eyes. Having two Lunas is going to be confusing as you get older, I said with what I hoped was a gentle smile. Maybe it's time for you to choose a different name that's just yours. The effect was immediate and devastating. My daughter's eyes went wide with shock, then filled with tears that began spilling down her cheeks. Her lower lip trembled as she processed what I just suggested. But Luna is my name, she whispered, her voice breaking. You gave it to me. It's the first thing that was really mine. Oh no, Luna the Qilin said in my mind, her mental voice filled with sympathy. The little one is crying. I don't want a different name, my daughter continued, now crying in earnest. I chose Luna because I love the moon, and it's beautiful, and you said it was perfect for me. Reika immediately moved closer, offering a handkerchief while shooting me a look that clearly said, fix this right now. Seraphina's expression was sympathetic but helpless, while Tiamat watched with the patient understanding of someone who had witnessed countless family dramas over the millennia. Sweetheart? I started, feeling panic rise as my daughter's tears increased. I didn't mean. I don't want to be someone else. Luna wailed, clinging to my shirt with desperate hands. I want to be me. I want to be Luna. Fatherhood. I thought as I gathered my sobbing daughter closer and tried to figure out how to undo the emotional catastrophe I just created. Is significantly harder than defeating ancient evils or running a guild or preventing apocalypses. Luna buried her face against my chest, her small body shaking with the force of her tears, while I sat there feeling like the worst father in existence and having absolutely no idea how to fix what I'd just broken. This was definitely not how I'd expected the evening to end. Chapter 704. What makes me me? 1. Why does Daddy want me to change my name? The thought kept spinning around in my head as I buried my face deeper into Daddy's shirt, feeling his warm hand stroking my hair. My chest hurt so much, like someone was squeezing my heart with cold fingers. The tears just kept coming no matter how hard I tried to stop them. He doesn't want me to be Luna anymore. Luna was the first thing that was really truly mine. Not like the butterfly toy that Princess Seraphina gave me, or the pretty clothes that Rose bought, or even the room at the palace that Princess Cecilia prepared. Those were gifts from people who loved Daddy, so they were nice to me too. But Luna was different. When Daddy asked me what I wanted to be called, I got to choose. Me. Little old me who had never been allowed to choose anything before. Not what I ate, not what I wore, not what I did, not even when I slept. Everything had always been decided by the doctors and the guards and the people in white coats who looked at me like I was a thing instead of a person. But Daddy asked what I wanted. I remembered that moment so clearly, when he asked me what name I wanted. Like my opinion mattered. Like I mattered. I had looked out the window at the night sky, at the beautiful moon hanging there like a silver coin, and I thought about how the moon was always there even when you couldn't see it during the day. Always watching, always gentle, always beautiful. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be Luna. And now he wants to take it away. The scary thoughts started creeping in, the ones I tried really hard not to think about. Maybe Daddy was getting tired of me. Maybe he realized I wasn't special anymore now that I couldn't do magic or fight bad people or be useful. Maybe he was starting to think I was useless as a normal little girl who couldn't do anything important. Maybe he's going to send me away. I squeezed my eyes shut and hugged Daddy tighter, trying to make the terrible thoughts go away. But they kept coming anyway, like monsters under the bed that got bigger in the dark. Before Daddy found me, I was valuable because I was strong. The doctors always told me how important I was, how special my power made me, how much they needed me to be perfect. Even though they were mean and scary, at least I knew why they kept me around. But what if I'm not worth keeping without my power? I knew Daddy wasn't like the doctors. He was kind and gentle, and he read me stories and braided my hair even when he was bad at it. He never made me feel like a weapon or a tool. But what if he only started caring about me because he felt sorry for me? What if now that I was just a regular little girl, he didn't need me anymore? What if changing my name is the first step to making me disappear? I don't want to be someone else. I whispered into his shirt, my voice all wobbly from crying. I want to be me. I want to be Luna. The name felt so important, like it was holding all the pieces of who I was together. Without it, what would be left? Just a scared little girl who used to be strong but wasn't anymore. Just someone taking up space in Daddy's life when he had so many important things to do. I felt Daddy's arms tighten around me, pulling me closer. His voice was soft and sad when he spoke. Oh, sweetheart, he said, and I could hear that he was upset too. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry. I would never want you to be someone else. But that just made me cry harder because now I was making Daddy sad too. And I was supposed to be a good girl who didn't cause problems. I'm sorry, I hiccuped against his chest. I'm sorry I'm crying. I know you have important things to do and I'm being silly. Hey, no, Daddy said firmly, lifting my chin so I had to look at him. His blue eyes were serious and kind, just like always. You are never silly for having feelings, and there is nothing more important to me than you. Nothing. But what about saving the world? What about the scary thing Tiamat told us about? But you have to get really strong to fight the bad thing, I said, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. And I can't help anymore because I'm not special. I'm just normal. Daddy's face did something complicated, like he was feeling too many things at once. Luna, he said, using my name like it was the most precious word in the world. Look at me. I sniffled and looked up at him. You are the most special person in my entire world, he said, and his voice was so serious that I almost believed him. Not because of any power you had, not because of what you could do. You're special because you're you, because you're kind and brave and smart and funny, because you make me smile every single day, because you're my daughter. My daughter. The words made something warm bloom in my chest, pushing back some of the cold, scary feelings. But I can't do magic anymore, I whispered. I can't protect you or help you fight. I'm just little. Do you want to know a secret? Daddy asked, leaning down so we were nose to nose. The strongest magic in the world isn't the kind that breaks things or hurts people. It's the kind that fixes them. And you, my brave girl, you have more of that magic than anyone I've ever met. I blinked at him, confused. Ido. You made me want to be a better person, he said softly. Just by existing, just by being yourself, you changed my whole world. You made Reika smile more. You made Cecilia want to protect something precious. You made Serafina buy toys and worry about bedtime stories. You turned all of us into a family. The warm feeling in my chest got bigger, like a little sun growing brighter. That's not magic, I said, but I didn't sound as sure anymore. It's the most powerful magic there is, Daddy insisted. It's love magic, and you're the strongest love magic user I've ever met. I giggled a little bit despite the tears still on my cheeks. Love magic sounds silly. Love magic, Daddy said with complete seriousness, is what makes people want to save the world in the first place. Without it, being strong is just being strong. But with it, you can make people want to be heroes. I thought about that for a minute, curled up safe in Daddy's arms while everyone else watched with gentle faces. Maybe I couldn't fight monsters anymore, but I could make Daddy smile when he was tired. I could help Reika remember to laugh. I could give Princess Serafina someone to take care of. Maybe that was important too. You really won't send me away? I asked in a very small voice. Even if I'm just normal now? Never, Daddy said, and his voice was so fierce that it scared away the last of the cold feelings. You could never do another magical thing in your entire life, and I would still love you exactly the same. You could turn into a frog, and I'd love you. You could become the world's worst student or the messiest eater or the loudest singer, and I would still be proud to be your daddy. Even if I sing off-key? I asked because I knew I was a terrible singer. Especially if you sing off-key, Daddy said solemnly. Off-key singing builds character. I giggled again, and this time it felt real. You're silly, Daddy. I'm your daddy, he corrected. Being silly is part of the job description. I snuggled closer to him, feeling much better. The scary thoughts were still there a little bit, but they felt smaller now, like shadows that weren't so dark anymore. About your name, Daddy said gently, and I tensed up again, but he kept talking before I could get scared. I wasn't trying to take Luna away from you. I was thinking that maybe you could have a name that was even more special. One that only belonged to you, that no one else in the whole world had. But I like Luna, I said, though I wasn't crying anymore. And Luna is perfect, Daddy agreed. But what if we found you a name that was like Luna, but even more you? Something that captured everything wonderful about who you are. I considered this. It did sound kind of nice, having something that was completely mine. What kind of name? Well, Daddy said thoughtfully, Luna means moon, and you love the moon. But what else do you love? Stars, I said immediately, and butterflies, and flowers, and stories, and you. What about all of those together? Daddy asked. What if we found a name that meant all the beautiful things you love? I thought about it, imagining a name that was like the moon and stars and butterflies all mixed together. That sounds pretty. I know a name, Princess Serafina said softly, speaking up for the first time since I started crying. In the old Elvish language, there's a word, Stellaria. It means star flower, a flower that only blooms under moonlight, and butterflies love it because it glows softly in the dark. Stellaria, I repeated, testing how it sounded. It was musical and pretty, like tinkling bells. It's long, but you could call yourself Stella for short, Daddy suggested. Stella Nightingale. Stella means star, the brightest star that guides people home safely. Stella. It felt different on my tongue than Luna, but not bad different, like putting on a dress that was fancier but still comfortable. And Luna could still be part of it, Daddy continued. Maybe Stella Luna Nightingale. So you'd have both. The moon you chose, and the star that's all yours. Stella Luna. I whispered, and something about it felt just right, like finding the perfect puzzle piece. So I'd still be Luna, but also Stella? You'd be both, Daddy confirmed. Everything you were, plus everything you're becoming. I sat up straighter in his lap, thinking about it. Stella Luna Nightingale. It sounded like the name of someone in a fairy tale. Someone who went on adventures and helped people and maybe sang to butterflies in moonlit gardens. Someone who was special just for being herself. Can I really be Stella Luna? I asked. You can be whatever you want to be, Daddy said, kissing my forehead. That's what makes you magnificent. I smiled, feeling the last of the scary feelings float away like dandelion seeds in the wind. Then I want to be Stella Luna Nightingale, because stars are beautiful, and the moon is beautiful, and I want to be beautiful too. You already are, Daddy said softly, inside and out. Chapter 705. Tiamat. 4. I watched the tender scene unfold before me with a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in centuries. Little Stella Luna, what a perfect name for such a precious child, had finally stopped crying and was now chattering excitedly about her new identity while nestled safely in Arthur's arms. The love radiating from that small family unit was so pure, so genuine, that it reminded me why I had spent millennia protecting this world. Such beautiful innocence, I thought, my fingers continuing to stroke Luna's golden mane as she dozed contentedly in my lap. The ancient Qilin had fallen asleep during the emotional discussion, her usual dignity completely abandoned in favor of the comfort she found in my presence. Even in sleep, she unconsciously pressed closer to me, seeking the maternal warmth that had been absent from her life for far too long. My dear Luna, my precious, brave little light. A pang of guilt twisted through my heart as I gazed down at her peaceful face. For so many years, I had kept the truth hidden from her, the real circumstances of her creation, the forces that had shaped her existence, the reason she had been sealed and scattered across time. I had told myself it was for her protection, that knowledge of her true nature would only bring her pain. But watching her now, seeing how she had found purpose and happiness despite not knowing her origins, I felt the weight of my deception like a stone in my chest. She deserved to know. She had always deserved to know. At least some of that burden had been lifted now. Part of the truth was out, painful as it had been to reveal. Luna understood what she was, how she had been created. More importantly, she had found someone worthy of her devotion. Someone who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide. Arthur Nightingale continued to surprise me, especially with his gray, a power that only had one equal in this universe. Love makes us stronger, I mused, watching him wipe away Stella's remaining tears with infinite patience. But it also makes us vulnerable. I pray that strength will be enough for what's coming. The critical time was approaching faster than I had anticipated. The body aspect of the heavenly demon was already beginning to coalesce, drawn by the chaotic energies that Arthur's rise to power had unleashed. The second calamity was merely the beginning. At least he won't be alone, I thought, observing the devoted women who surrounded him. Reka with her unwavering loyalty, Seraphina with her analytical brilliance, and little Stella with her pure love, and two more princesses who loved him and his family, the special nightingales. They would anchor him when the burden became too heavy to bear alone. The evening wore on with gentle conversation and shared laughter, the kind of simple domestic joy that I had witnessed so rarely in my long existence. Watching Arthur's family reminded me of why I fought, why I had dedicated myself to protecting this world and its people. It wasn't for grand ideals or cosmic balance. It was for moments like this, for the right of ordinary beings to love and be loved without fear. Eventually, the hour grew late enough that even Stella's boundless energy began to flag. She fell asleep against Arthur's chest, her small face peaceful and content. Luna continued to slumber in my lap, occasionally making soft sounds that might have been Qilin dreams. I should take Stella back to our rooms, Arthur said quietly, carefully adjusting his hold on his daughter. It's been a long day for everyone. Of course, I agreed, though I found myself reluctant to end this perfect evening. Thank you for allowing me to spend this time with both of you. It has been precious. Arthur met my eyes with understanding that went deeper than his years should have allowed. Thank you for everything you've told me tonight, and for the gift. I won't waste it. I know you won't, I replied softly. You're stronger than you realize, Arthur Nightingale. Stronger than any of your predecessors. As the small family prepared to leave, Luna stirred in my lap and opened one golden eye. Do I have to go? She asked drowsily through our mental connection. Rest well, little one, I murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. We'll see each other again soon. Promise. I promise. After they departed, I remained in the luxurious chamber for several minutes, savoring the lingering warmth of their presence. But duty called as it always did. There were arrangements to be made, pieces to be positioned on the cosmic chessboard. I rose from my chair and stepped out onto the chamber's private balcony, letting the cool night air clear my thoughts. A moment's concentration brought my dragon senses to bear, and I located my target easily enough. King Marcus Vizirian had arrived in his office after hearing about how I descended. He felt my approach long before I materialized in his chamber, his draconic heritage alerting him to the presence of his superior. Your Majesty, he said, immediately dropping to one knee without even looking up to confirm my identity. The gesture was automatic, ingrained by centuries of tradition and genuine respect. Marcus, I acknowledged, allowing a hint of warmth to color my voice. The Vizirian bloodline had served me faithfully for generations, and this particular king had proven especially capable. Rise, we have matters to discuss. He stood but kept his head bowed respectfully. How may I serve you, great guardian? The contract with Ouroboros regarding Etherite distribution, you will accept their terms. All of them. Marcus blinked, clearly surprised by the directness of my command. Your Majesty, while Arthur Nightingale's proposals are generous, some of my advisors have concerns about the long-term implications of such exclusive arrangements. The economic dependencies could prove problematic if— Marcus, I interrupted gently, and he fell silent immediately. I am not making a suggestion. I am giving you a direct command. You will accept the Ouroboros contract in its entirety. The king's expression shifted to one of understanding. When I spoke in that particular tone, it meant the matter was connected to forces beyond normal political considerations. Of course, Your Majesty, it will be done. Good. Additionally, you will provide Arthur with any resources he requests during his time on this continent. Consider Ouroboros to have the full backing of the Southern Crown. May I ask why this alliance is so important? Marcus ventured carefully. I considered how much to reveal. The truth about the approaching calamity would only cause panic and potentially destabilize the very foundations I was trying to protect. Better to let them focus on the immediate benefits while I handled the larger picture. Arthur Nightingale is going to change the world, I said simply. When that change comes, I want the southern continent to be on the correct side of history. I understand, Your Majesty. See that you do. And Marcus, I added as I prepared to depart, keep your son close during the coming years. Ian will have an important role to play when the time comes. Without waiting for a response, I shifted back to my dragon form and launched myself into the night sky. The mountain air felt good against my scales as I climbed higher, seeking the solitude I needed to think. From this altitude, I could see the entire palace complex spread out below me like a collection of jewels. Somewhere in those walls, Arthur was probably tucking Stella into bed and preparing for another day of negotiations that would reshape continental politics. Luna was likely curled up in her spiritual form, dreaming of peaceful times that might never come again. As I prepared to return to my lair, I caught sight of a distant balcony where a familiar figure stood looking out at the stars. Arthur, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, seeking answers in the night sky. I couldn't speak to him, couldn't offer more guidance or comfort, but I could give him something else, a gesture of respect from one guardian to another. Maintaining my altitude so he would see me clearly, I folded my wings and bowed in the ancient manner, dragon to hero, acknowledging his burden and his courage. Then I disappeared into the darkness, leaving him to face whatever dreams and nightmares awaited. The world depended on Arthur Nightingale. Chapter 706. Southern Continent. 4. The morning sun streamed through the palace windows as I made my way to the formal dining room, expecting another day of careful negotiations and diplomatic maneuvering. Stella had already been awake for an hour, chattering excitedly about her new name while Reka helped her get dressed in one of the southern continent's traditional children's outfits. A flowing dress decorated with tiny embroidered dragons that made her look like a fairy tale princess. "Daddy, look!" she called out as I entered the room, spinning to make the dress's skirts flare out. "The dragons move when I twirl." "Very impressive," I said, scooping her up for a morning hug. "Good morning, Princess Stella Luna." She giggled at the formal address, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Good morning, Daddy. Are we having more boring meetings today?" "Hopefully not too boring," I replied, settling her into her chair before taking my own seat. "Prince Ian should be joining us shortly to discuss." "Arthur." Ian's voice boomed across the dining room as he strode in with the kind of energetic confidence that could only come from very good news. "Perfect timing. I have excellent news." Something in his tone made me look up sharply. The negotiations had been going well, but Ian's expression suggested something beyond normal diplomatic success. "The council has reviewed your proposal," Ian continued, his golden eyes practically gleaming with satisfaction. "We accept all terms, all conditions, exactly as presented." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "All terms. Every single one," Ian confirmed, pulling out an ornate document bearing the royal seal. "Exclusive Etherite distribution rights for the southern continent, preferential pricing structures, joint research initiatives, military applications development, everything." The surprise must have shown on my face because Ian's grin widened. "I take it this is better than you expected?" "Significantly better," I admitted, accepting the signed contract with something approaching disbelief. "Ian, these terms were intentionally ambitious. I expected months of back-and-forth negotiations." "Well," Ian said with a slight shrug, "sometimes the stars align perfectly. The council was unusually decisive." I caught the careful phrasing and understood immediately. Tiamat's influence. "Regardless of the reasons," I said, meaning every word, "this is incredible news. The Southern Continent's partnership will accelerate our timeline significantly." With the major negotiations concluded ahead of schedule, I found myself with an unexpected gift. Time. Real, unstructured time to spend with Stella without the pressure of political obligations hanging over every moment. "Since we're done with the boring business stuff," I said, turning to my daughter with a smile, "how would you like to explore the palace with just me? I hear they have some very interesting things here." Stella's face lit up like sunrise. Just you and me, Daddy? Just you and me, I confirmed, ignoring the way my chest tightened at her obvious delight. When had simply spending time with her father become such a rare treat that it warranted that level of excitement? After arranging for Reika and Serafina to have some well-deserved rest time, Stella and I set off to explore the palace grounds together. The moment we stepped into the corridors, I noticed something different in how the staff treated us. Guards bowed deeper than protocol required, servants stepped aside with obvious reverence, and even nobles we passed offered respectful nods rather than the casual acknowledgments typical between peers. Word of Tiamat's visit had clearly spread throughout the palace. In the southern continent, where dragon worship was deeply ingrained in the culture, being personally sought out by the radiant dragon carried implications that went far beyond normal political favor. Daddy? Stella whispered as we passed a group of courtiers who practically prostrated themselves. Why is everyone acting so weird? They're showing respect, I explained quietly. Sometimes when very important people take an interest in you, it changes how others see you too. Is that good or bad? It's useful, I said after consideration. But it doesn't change who we are inside. Our first stop was the palace's famous dragon reserve, a vast enclosed courtyard where various dragon subspecies lived in carefully maintained habitats. Unlike the massive preserve Ian had told us about in the mountains, this was more intimate, designed to allow close interaction between the royal family and their draconic allies. Welcome, Lord Nightingale, the reserve keeper said with a bow that was noticeably deeper than his earlier greeting. Lady Stella, how wonderful to see you. As we entered the main courtyard, I was struck by the variety of dragons present, but also by their limitations. The largest was perhaps 30 feet long, impressive by any normal standard but nowhere near Tiamat's colossal size. Most were integration or ascendant rank in power, with only a few reaching even immortal rank. No wonder Tiamat is treated with such reverence, I thought, watching a beautiful silver dragon demonstrate aerial maneuvers for Stella's entertainment. True radiant rank dragons must be extraordinarily rare. To put Tiamat's offer into perspective, Bahamut's heart wasn't just a powerful magical artifact. It was the preserved essence of a being that had stood at the absolute pinnacle of achievement. Daddy, look, Stella called out, drawing my attention back to the present. She was carefully offering treats to a small bronze dragon who was performing what could only be described as showing off loops, barrel rolls, and precision landings that made the creature look like a living work of art. This is Ember, the keeper explained. She's only 80 years old, practically a hatchling. Very social, loves attention. Hello, Ember, Stella said solemnly, offering the treat with proper reverence. You're very talented. Ember preened at the compliment, then surprised everyone by gently nuzzling Stella's hand. A sign of acceptance that even the keeper seemed impressed by. She likes you, I observed with amusement. I like her too, Stella replied, carefully stroking Ember's scales. She's so pretty and graceful. Can I visit her again? I'm sure that can be arranged, the keeper said warmly. Ember would enjoy the company. We spent the better part of an hour in the reserve, with Stella making friends with several of the dragons while I marveled at their intelligence and personality. Each one was distinctly individual, with preferences and quirks that reminded me more of people than animals. After the reserve, we explored other parts of the palace. The Hall of Ancestors with its portraits of legendary heroes, the Crystal Observatory where Stella was fascinated by the way sunlight refracted through carved prisms, and the Royal Library where ancient texts sat alongside children's storybooks. This place is like a fairy tale castle, Stella said as we walked through a corridor lined with tapestries depicting dragon-human partnerships throughout history. In many ways it is, I agreed. The Viserians have been building this place for 1,000 years, adding something new with each generation. Will I have a place like this someday? The innocent question caught me off guard. Would you want one? Maybe, she said thoughtfully, but only if you were there too, and Reika and Princess Serafina and everyone else. What's the point of having a beautiful castle if you're lonely? Out of the mouths of babes, I thought, struck by her wisdom. That's very wise, sweetheart. The best places are the ones filled with people you love. Exactly, she agreed with satisfaction. That's why our home is perfect even though it's just a penthouse, because our family is there. Our exploration was interrupted by the arrival of Ian, who found us in the palace's famous butterfly garden, a controlled environment where rare species from across the continent flourished in perpetual spring. There you are, he said with a grin, watching Stella attempt to coax a particularly large butterfly to land on her finger. I've been looking for you too. I have a proposition. Oh, I asked, noting the excited gleam in his eyes. Well, since our business is concluded ahead of schedule, and since I have a few days before I need to be back for classes, I was wondering. He paused dramatically. How would you feel about a proper tour of the southern continent? There are some amazing cities I'd love to show Stella, the crystal markets of Drakmor, the floating gardens of Velthera, maybe even the famous singing caves of Pyros. Stella's head snapped up, the butterfly momentarily forgotten. Singing caves. Caves that sing in harmony when the wind passes through them. Ian explained with obvious enjoyment of her reaction. They say the music can make flowers bloom out of season. Can we go, Daddy? Please, Stella asked with the kind of desperate hope that only children could muster. I looked at my daughter's eager face, then at Ian's equally enthusiastic expression, and felt something in my chest relax. The second calamity was still coming. Bahamut's heart still waited to be studied and eventually consumed. The impossible goal of reaching demigod status in 4 years still loomed over everything. But right now, in this moment, I had the opportunity to give my daughter experiences that would create happy memories for the rest of her life. 2 days, I asked Ian. 2 days, he confirmed. I'll handle all the arrangements, know all the best places, and I promise to keep Princess Stella thoroughly entertained. Well, I said with mock consideration. If Prince Ian is willing to be our tour guide. Yes, Stella exclaimed, bouncing on her toes. Yes, yes, yes. We can see singing caves and floating gardens and crystal markets. Then it's settled, Ian said with satisfaction. 2 days of adventure for Princess Stella, and a proper vacation for the rest of us. When do you want to leave? Tomorrow morning? I suggested. That gives us time to pack and plan the route. Perfect. I'll have everything ready. Ian's grin was infectious. This is going to be fantastic. As we headed back toward our quarters to begin preparations, Stella chattered excitedly about all the things she hoped to see. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself genuinely looking forward to the mini-adventure ahead. Chapter 707. Southern Continent. 5. The morning sun streamed through the palace windows as our group gathered in the main courtyard, where Ian had arranged for a sleek hovering transport that looked more like a luxury yacht than a vehicle. The craft's silver hull gleamed in the early sunlight, adorned with subtle dragon motifs that seemed to shift and move as the light caught them. Now this is traveling in style, I murmured, watching as palace attendants loaded our luggage into the cargo hold. Wait until you see the interior, Ian said with obvious pride. My family doesn't do anything halfway. Stella practically vibrated with excitement beside me, clutching a small travel bag Reka had helped her pack the night before. She wore another traditional Southern Continent outfit. This one a practical but elegant tunic and pants ensemble in deep blue with silver threading that made her look like a young adventurer from one of her storybooks. Daddy, how fast does it go? She asked, pressing her face against the transport's viewing window. Fast enough to make excellent time, Ian answered before I could. But smooth enough that you won't even feel like we're moving. Serafina approached with her usual composed grace, carrying a single bag despite my insistence that she pack for comfort rather than efficiency. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she'd chosen form-fitting travel clothes in her signature ice blue. Practical yet elegant, like everything about her. All preparations complete, she said simply, though I caught the subtle warmth in her ice blue eyes as she looked at Stella's obvious excitement. Reka arrived moments later, having spent the morning coordinating with the palace staff about our departure. Her violet hair caught the morning light like spun silk, and her violet eyes held that particular gleam they got when she was pleased about something. The kitchen has prepared travel provisions, she announced, and Prince Ian's staff has confirmed all our accommodations. Everything is arranged perfectly. Your devotion to handling every detail never ceases to amaze me. I thought, earning a small, satisfied smile from her as if she'd heard the thought. Ready for adventure, everyone? Ian called out cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to my internal conversation. More than ready, I replied, scooping Stella up to carry her aboard the transport. The interior of the craft exceeded even my elevated expectations. Rich fabrics in warm earth tones created distinct seating areas, while panoramic windows offered unobstructed views in every direction. Advanced holographic displays showed our route and points of interest, while climate control kept the temperature perfectly comfortable. This is like being inside a cloud palace, Stella breathed, pressing her nose to the largest window as we lifted off. The Verdania gem markets are about 3 hours away, Ian explained, settling into the pilot seat with practiced ease. The route takes us over some of the most beautiful landscape on the continent. Valleys, rivers, and mountain peaks that change color depending on the time of day. As we gained altitude, I found myself genuinely relaxing for the first time in weeks. Below us, the landscape unfolded like a living tapestry. Forests so green they seemed to glow, rivers that sparkled like ribbons of light, and mountains that rose in majestic peaks toward the sky. Look, Daddy, Stella pointed excitedly at a herd of creatures grazing in a distant valley. Are those dragons? Lesser drakes, Ian corrected gently. Distant cousins of true dragons, but still impressive. They're about the size of horses and completely harmless to humans. Serafina moved to sit beside me, her presence a comfortable anchor of calm in the midst of Stella's bubbling excitement. She didn't speak, but her shoulder pressed gently against mine in silent companionship. Enjoying yourself? I asked quietly. Yes, she replied simply. But the way her gaze lingered on Stella's animated face told me everything about what was making this trip special for her. Reka had settled across from us, alternating between monitoring holographic displays. Habit, I suspected, and watching the scenery with genuine appreciation. Her fingers moved constantly, whether adjusting her hair, smoothing her clothes, or simply fidgeting with nervous energy. You can relax, you know, I told her gently. Nothing's going to go wrong on a simple vacation. I am relaxed, she protested, though her posture suggested otherwise. I'm just, ensuring everything remains perfect. She's incapable of truly relaxing when you're involved, Luna observed with amusement. Too devoted to your well-being to ever completely let her guard down. And what's wrong with that? I asked. Nothing, Luna replied. Though it does make me wonder how you manage to inspire such loyalty. It's almost supernatural. Maybe I'm just naturally charming. Luna's mental snort was decidedly unladylike. Right? And I'm a common house cat. The journey passed quickly with Stella providing enthusiastic commentary on everything she saw, Ian sharing stories about the various landmarks, and comfortable conversation flowing between all of us. By the time the Verdania gem markets came into view, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. There it is, Ian announced, and I understood immediately why the markets had earned their reputation. The city sprawled across a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside, but what made it extraordinary were the massive gemstone formations that had been cultivated over centuries. Enormous emeralds, sapphires, and rubies jutted from terraced gardens like crystalline trees, their surfaces catching and refracting sunlight into brilliant displays of color that painted the entire city in rainbows. It's like a fairy tale, Stella whispered, and for once her usual exuberance was replaced by awed wonder. The gems are natural formations enhanced by generations of Earth aspect mages, Ian explained as we descended toward the landing platform. They're not just beautiful. They store and amplify magical energy, providing power for the entire city while creating the most spectacular jewelry market on the continent. As we disembarked, the first thing that struck me was the way light seemed to dance everywhere. Reflections from countless precious stones creating an environment that felt almost otherworldly. Welcome to Verdania, Lord Nightingale, Lady Stella. The market administrator greeted us with a bow that was respectful but not excessive. Prince Ian has arranged for a complete tour of our finest establishments. The markets themselves were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Vendors sold goods from across the continent. Everything from practical items enhanced with gem technology to works of art that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Beast bloodline descendants displayed their wares with obvious pride, and I noticed how many of them bore subtle physical traits that spoke to their heritage. Enhanced senses, unusual eye colors, or grace that seemed almost supernatural. Daddy, look at this! Stella called out from a vendor's stall where a craftsman was demonstrating gem-enhanced tools that could shape metal with mere touch. Impressive. I agreed, watching as the artisan created intricate decorative pieces with casual skill. The gems respond to intent as much as magical energy, the craftsman explained, his cat-like eyes marking him as someone with feline bloodline heritage. A skilled user can achieve remarkable precision. We spent hours wandering through the markets, with Stella collecting small gemstone souvenirs and everyone finding items that caught their interest. Serafina was drawn to elegant sapphire jewelry that complemented her ice aspect abilities, while Reika found books on gem cultivation techniques. This is pleasant, Luna commented as we paused at a cafe for refreshments. Almost makes one forget about impending apocalypses and impossible goals. That's the point, I replied. Sometimes you need to remember what you're fighting to protect. Very philosophical, Luna said approvingly. Though I notice you haven't bought anything for your other 3 companions back home. I nearly choked on my drink. Was that supposed to be subtle? When am I ever subtle? Luna asked innocently. But Rose, Rachel, and Cecilia might appreciate thoughtful gifts from your romantic getaway. It's not a romantic getaway, I protested. Stella's here. Tell that to the way Reika and Serafina keep looking at you when they think you're not paying attention. I glanced around and had to admit Luna had a point. Both women seemed more relaxed than usual, and there was definitely something softer in their expressions when they looked at me interacting with Stella or simply enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. The afternoon faded into evening as we settled into our accommodations. A gem-enhanced in that offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. Stella fell asleep almost immediately after dinner, exhausted by the day's excitement, leaving the adults to enjoy quiet conversation on the inn's terrace. Tomorrow we head to the Singing Caves of Pyros, Ian said, gesturing toward the distant horizon where the next city's lights were barely visible. They're even more impressive than the gem markets, if you can believe that. I'm beginning to think the southern continent specializes in the impossible, I replied, watching the way the gemstone formations continued to glow softly even in darkness. When you have dragon magic integrated into your culture for 1,000 years, Ian said with a shrug, the impossible becomes merely challenging. Serafina leaned back in her chair, looking more at peace than I'd seen her in months. This is nice, she said simply. High praise from Princess Serafina, Ian teased gently. I'll take that as approval of our hospitality. You should. I agreed, meaning it. This has been exactly what we all needed. As the evening wound down and we prepared to retire, I felt a contentment that had been absent from my life for far too long. Tomorrow would bring new sights and experiences, and for once, the weight of future responsibilities felt manageable. Careful, Luna warned with gentle amusement. You're starting to sound dangerously close to happy. Is that a problem? Not at all, she replied warmly. You deserve happiness, Arthur. Just remember to enjoy it while it lasts. Chapter 708. Southern Continent. 6. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the gemstone formations of Verdania casting rainbow prisms across our breakfast table. Stella had recovered completely from yesterday's adventure-induced exhaustion and was already planning out loud everything she wanted to see at our next destination. "Prince Ian, do the caves really sing?" she asked for the fourth time, bouncing slightly in her chair as she worked her way through a plate of fruit that had been enhanced with subtle gem magic to taste impossibly fresh and sweet. "They absolutely do," Ian confirmed patiently, his golden eyes bright with amusement. Different caves produce different notes depending on their size and shape. When the wind is just right, they create harmonies that can be heard for miles. "And flowers really bloom out of season because of the music?" "That's what they say," Ian replied. "Magic and music have always been closely connected, especially here in the southern continent." I found myself watching my daughter's excitement with a contentment that surprised me. When had I last been able to simply enjoy her wonder without calculating threats, analyzing political implications, or worrying about the next crisis demanding my attention? "You're thinking very loudly this morning," Luna observed with amusement. "All that contentment is making my teeth ache." "I thought Cheelants were supposed to appreciate peace and harmony," I shot back. "We do," Luna replied primly. "But we also know that life has a way of disrupting perfect moments. I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Can't you just let me enjoy this without adding your pessimistic commentary?" "Pessimistic? I prefer realistically cautious. Though I suppose after your performance yesterday with the gem vendor, perhaps I should be more concerned about your judgment in general." I frowned. "What performance?" "The one where you spent 20 minutes discussing gem resonance theory with that craftsman while completely missing the fact that he was obviously hoping to interest you in his daughter, who just happened to be working the next stall over." I nearly spilled my coffee. "He was doing what?" "Arthur," Luna said with the mental equivalent of an eye roll. "For someone who supposedly leads one of the most powerful organizations on the continent, you can be remarkably oblivious to personal interactions." "I was being polite and showing interest in local craftsmanship," I protested. "You were being charming without realizing it," which made both Reka and Serafina tense up until the poor man finally gave up and wandered away. Looking across the table, I caught Reka's violet eyes and saw something that might have been residual satisfaction in her expression. Serafina, as usual, revealed nothing in her composed features, but there was a subtle relaxation in her posture that suggested Luna might be onto something. "I notice you're not denying it," Luna continued smugly. "I notice you're being particularly chatty for someone who supposedly doesn't talk much," I replied. "Maybe I should start calling you Luna the commentary Cheelan. Just because I choose my words carefully doesn't mean I don't have opinions," Luna huffed. "And at least I'm not the one who—" "Daddy, you're making funny faces again," Stella interrupted, looking at me with curious eyes. "Are you talking to Luna? How did you—" I started, then caught myself. Stella had always been unusually perceptive about things she shouldn't be able to sense. "You get a specific look when you're having mental conversations," Serafina observed quietly. "Your expression becomes distant but amused. It's quite distinctive," Reka added with a small smile. "We've learned to recognize it." "Oh, wonderful," Luna said with mortification. "Now they know when I'm talking to you. This is embarrassing." "For you or for me?" I asked. "Both of us, clearly." Ian looked between us with obvious curiosity but was too polite to ask directly about private magical abilities. Instead, he clapped his hands together with renewed enthusiasm. "Well, if everyone's finished breakfast, we should get moving. The singing caves are about 2 hours away, and the wind conditions are supposed to be perfect for music today." The journey to Piros took us through some of the most spectacular countryside I'd ever seen. Where yesterday's landscape had been all gems and mountain grandeur, today's route wound through rolling hills covered in wildflowers that seemed to dance in the breeze. Occasionally, we passed herds of the lesser drakes Ian had mentioned, their scales glinting in the sunlight as they grazed peacefully. "Look at all the colors," Stella breathed, her face pressed against the transport's window as we flew over a valley carpeted in flowers that ranged from deep purple to brilliant gold. "Flower magic is another southern continent specialty," Ian explained. "Many of our beast bloodline families have connections to plant growth and cultivation. That valley you're admiring is maintained by the Thornfield family. Their bloodline allows them to encourage blooming cycles year-round." As we approached Piros, the landscape began to change dramatically. Rolling hills gave way to dramatic cliff faces and deep canyons, with the city itself built into and around a series of natural cave openings that dotted the canyon walls like windows in a giant stone building. "There," Ian pointed toward the largest cave opening, where we could see people gathered on viewing platforms carved into the rock face. "That's the main resonance chamber. When the wind hits it just right," as if summoned by his words, a low, haunting note echoed across the canyon. Deep and pure, like the voice of the mountain itself. The sound was followed by higher notes from smaller caves, creating a harmony that seemed to make the very air shimmer. "It's beautiful," Serafina said softly, and I realized it was the most emotional response I'd heard from her since we'd arrived in the southern continent. "Wait until you hear the full symphony," Ian promised as we began our descent toward the landing platform. The city of Piros was built around the caves in a way that seemed to grow naturally from the rock itself. Walkways and platforms connected different levels, while the cave openings served as both natural amphitheaters and practical spaces for shops, restaurants, and homes. The whole city is designed to enhance the acoustic properties of the caves. Our local guide explained as we disembarked. She was a woman with the subtle pointed ears and enhanced hearing that suggested some form of bat bloodline heritage. Every building, every walkway, even the placement of gardens, everything is positioned to complement the natural music. As we made our way through the city toward the main viewing areas, the caves continued their mysterious concert. Sometimes a single note would ring out clear and solitary. Other times, multiple caves would harmonize in combinations that seemed too perfect to be accidental. "Daddy, it sounds like the mountain is singing just for us," Stella said with wonder, unconsciously walking in rhythm with the current melody. "Maybe it is," I replied, and found myself believing it. There was something magical about this place that went beyond mere acoustic engineering. We spent hours exploring the different listening platforms, each offering unique acoustic experiences. From some positions, the music seemed to surround us completely. From others, we could hear individual cave voices more clearly, picking out the subtle differences in tone and timbre. "This platform is my favorite," Ian said, leading us to a smaller viewing area that jutted out from the cliff face like a natural balcony. "The acoustics here create something special." As if the caves had been waiting for our arrival, a gentle breeze began to blow through the canyon. One by one, the cave voices joined in what could only be described as a symphony, deep bass notes from the largest caves providing foundation, while smaller openings added melodic lines that wove together in impossible harmony. "Oh," Stella breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like the whole world is singing." The music seemed to affect everyone differently. Stella began swaying gently, her natural grace turning the simple movement into something resembling dance. Serafina stood perfectly still, but I could see tears gathering in her ice-blue eyes, the most emotional display I'd ever witnessed from her. Reika moved closer to me unconsciously, her hand finding mine as the harmonies swelled around us. "Even I have to admit this is remarkable," Luna said quietly, her usual sarcasm replaced by genuine appreciation. "There's old magic here, very old." "Any idea what kind?" I asked. "The kind that remembers when the world was younger," Luna replied cryptically. "When the barriers between music and magic, between harmony and reality, were thinner than they are now." As the wind began to die down, the symphony gradually faded to individual notes, then to silence. For a long moment, none of us spoke, still caught in the spell of what we'd experienced. "That was," I started, then found I didn't have adequate words. "Yeah," Ian agreed softly. "It gets everyone that way the first time. Can we come back tomorrow?" Stella asked hopefully. "Maybe the caves will sing a different song." "They always do," our guide assured her with a gentle smile. "The music changes with the weather, the season, even the time of day. No two performances are ever exactly the same." As the afternoon progressed, we explored more of the city, visiting artisan workshops where craftspeople created instruments designed to complement the natural cave music, and restaurants where the seating was arranged to provide optimal acoustic experiences during meals. "This whole place is like a work of art," Reika observed as we stopped for refreshments at a cafe built into a smaller cave opening. "Every detail serves both practical and aesthetic purposes." "That's the Southern Continent way," Ian said with obvious pride. "Why choose between functional and beautiful when you can have both?" The peaceful contentment of the day continued as we made our way to our accommodation for the night. A boutique carved directly into the cliff face, with rooms that offered unobstructed views of the canyon and its musical caves. "Tomorrow we can visit the meditation gardens," Ian suggested as we settled on the inn's terrace for dinner. "They're designed to complement the cave music, and supposedly help visitors achieve states of perfect mental clarity." "Sounds wonderful," I replied, watching Stella lean against Serafina's side as exhaustion from another day of adventure began to catch up with her. "This is nice," I thought, looking around at my small family enjoying the peaceful evening. "I could get used to this." "Don't get too comfortable," Luna warned, but even her tone was gentler than usual. "Though I suppose everyone deserves moments like this." As if her words had been prophetic, the peaceful silence of the evening was suddenly shattered by a thunderous explosion that shook the entire cliff face. Emergency lights blazed to life across the city as alarms began wailing, and in the distance, I could see the distinctive glow of magical fire. Of course, trouble always had a way to come to me. Chapter 709. Guild War 1. The 12 Great Guilds. Feroclism, one of the 12 great guilds of the Slatemark Empire, stood as a titan within the central continent. For decades, its reach was unchallenged, its coffers endlessly filled, and its dominance unquestioned. At its helm was Maxwell von Pontes, a man whose name was whispered with reverence and fear alike. A revolutionary alchemist and engineer, Maxwell had shaped Feroclism into an industrial colossus while climbing to the rank of mid-immortal ranker. His brilliance in crafting weapons and military technology was matched only by his ruthless efficiency in eliminating competition. But now, Maxwell faced a crisis unlike any he had encountered since taking the reins of Feroclism. A crisis he could not crush with intellect or sheer power alone. He exhaled deeply, letting the sound of his breath fill the opulent silence of his private office. His fingers trembled slightly as he touched the edge of the holographic letter projected before him. Closing his eyes, he counted to 5. When he opened them again, the contents remained unchanged, as immovable as stone. A decrease in orders. The words taunted him, mocked him. The Slatemark Military, Ferroclism's largest and most lucrative client, had slashed its orders. Not by a small margin. No, this was a seismic shift, a gaping hole in their projections that would bleed the guild dry if not addressed swiftly. Worse yet, intelligence reports confirmed what Maxwell had feared. The military had redirected those same contracts to a newer guild, to Ouroboros. Maxwell's golden eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he leaned back in his chair. His mind churned, calculating, plotting, dissecting the implications. Ferroclism's profits came predominantly from its ironclad contracts with the military, secured through decades of unparalleled service and unassailable innovation. This wasn't just a blow to their finances. It was an insult, a challenge, a declaration of war. The room was silent but for the faint hum of mana-powered devices. Maxwell's reflection glared back at him from the dark glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind him, the sprawling cityscape of the central continent's capital glittered, a testament to Ferroclism's contributions to the Empire's might. They can't be outsourcing, Maxwell thought, his mind racing through possibilities. Breaking a contract of this scale would require the Empire to pay Ferroclism penalties so astronomical that even their vast coffers would feel the pinch. The military wouldn't dare. Not unless they had found something superior. Something that made Ferroclism's weapons look obsolete. Ouroboros. The name surfaced in his mind like a shadowy specter. That upstart guild. That audacious newcomer led by Arthur Nightingale, barely 21 years old and already calling himself guild master. Maxwell had heard whispers of Aetheryte, of innovations that defied the known boundaries of mana and technology. But he'd dismissed them initially. A fledgling guild could hardly compete with Ferroclism's centuries of dominance. Now, though, doubt seeped in like a poison, followed immediately by volcanic rage. They dare, Maxwell muttered, his voice low and venomous. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists. They dare attack us like this? His mind reeled at the sheer audacity. To challenge Ferroclism was to challenge one of the foundational pillars of the Empire itself. Aetheryte or not, Ouroboros had no business encroaching on Ferroclism's domain. Maxwell's lip curled into a snarl as he leaned forward, the glint of gold in his eyes turning to molten fury. But even through his rage, the calculating mind that had built an industrial empire continued working. If Arthur Nightingale thought he could simply waltz into Ferroclism's territory and steal their contracts without consequence, he would learn otherwise. The boy might be powerful, but he was young, inexperienced. And right now, according to Maxwell's intelligence network, he was vulnerable. Maxwell activated his holographic display, pulling up real-time intelligence reports. His network of informants was vast, spanning continents and social circles. It had taken less than 6 hours to track Arthur's location after he'd made the mistake of traveling publicly to the southern continent. Heroes, Maxwell read aloud, his golden eyes scanning the report. The Singing Caves. How quaint. The irony wasn't lost on him. Arthur Nightingale, the supposed strategic genius who had outmaneuvered Ferroclism in the political arena, had made the classic mistake of mixing business with pleasure. He was vacationing with his family, including a young daughter, in one of the southern continent's most famous tourist destinations, away from his power base, away from his guild's defenses, away from the political protections that had allowed him to steal Ferroclism's contracts. Maxwell's dark grin widened as he continued reading. Traveling with minimal security, staying at a civilian hotel, taking his time to enjoy the local attractions. He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. You've grown complacent, young Nightingale. Fatal mistake. Rising from his seat, Maxwell began pacing, his mind already formulating the attack. A guild war would be the perfect solution, legal under imperial law, justifiable given the economic assault Ouroboros had launched, and most importantly, it would send a message to the other 10 great guilds that Ferroclism was not to be trifled with. The beauty of targeting Arthur in the southern continent was that it could be framed as a precision strike against Ouroboros' leadership rather than an attack on southern sovereignty. The Vizirian royal family maintained neutrality in inter-guild conflicts, and Maxwell's lawyers had already confirmed that guild war declarations extended across continental boundaries when pursuing legitimate targets. Maxwell reached for his communication device, his fingers moving with predatory precision as he began issuing orders. Marshal Thorne, he said as the line connected to his chief military officer. Initiate Guild War Protocol 7. Target, Arthur Nightingale of Ouroboros. Location, Pyros, Southern Continent. Authorization, Maxwell von Pontes, Guild Master of Ferroclism. Understood, sir, came the crisp reply. Estimated time to deployment? 2 hours, Maxwell replied, consulting his chronometer. I want overwhelming force. This ends tonight. Sir, what about civilian casualties? Pyros is a tourist destination. Acceptable losses. Maxwell cut him off coldly. Nightingale chose to hide among civilians. Their blood is on his hands, not ours. Focus fire on the target location, but I want everyone to know that crossing Ferroclism has consequences. As Marshal Thorne began barking orders in the background, Maxwell activated additional communication channels. His media team would need to craft the narrative Ouroboros had conducted an unprovoked economic assault on Ferroclism, forcing a defensive response. His legal team would handle any international complications. His intelligence division would ensure that Arthur had no advance warning of the attack. Sir, came another voice on the tactical channel. Orbital strike platforms are positioning over the southern continent. Mana-enhanced weapons are charged and ready. We have visual confirmation of the target location. Maxwell pulled up the tactical display, watching as his forces moved into position like pieces on a chessboard. 3 strike teams equipped with Ferroclism's most advanced combat technology. Orbital bombardment platforms. Enough firepower to level a small city, all focused on one hotel in Pyros where a young guild master thought he was safe. Visual confirmation of Arthur Nightingale? Maxwell asked. Affirmative. Target is currently on the hotel's terrace with 3 companions. Minimal security presence detected. Perfect. Maxwell's golden eyes gleamed with savage satisfaction. Arthur was exactly where intelligence had placed him. Relaxed, unguarded, surrounded by the people he cared about most. The boy had made himself vulnerable, and Maxwell intended to exploit that weakness completely. All units, this is Guild Master Von Pontes, Maxwell announced on the general tactical frequency. Arthur Nightingale and Ouroboros have declared economic war on Ferroclism by stealing our military contracts. Tonight, we respond with the full might of our guild. This is not just retaliation, this is a lesson. When you challenge one of the 12 great guilds, you face the consequences. He paused, watching the tactical display as his forces completed their final positioning. In the distance, he could see the peaceful lights of Pyros, unaware of the destruction bearing down on them. Remember, Maxwell continued, his voice carrying across the communication network to hundreds of Ferroclism operatives. We are not murderers, we are defenders. Ouroboros struck first. We are simply ensuring they understand the price of their aggression. All units, prepare for coordinated assault. Maxwell settled back into his command chair, watching the tactical display with the cold satisfaction of a predator about to strike. Arthur Nightingale had played his political games brilliantly in the comfortable halls of the imperial capital. Now he would learn what happened when those games spilled into the real world. Begin the assault, Maxwell commanded. On the display, the first explosions bloomed like deadly flowers across the peaceful city of Pyros. The Singing Caves, famous for their harmony and beauty, erupted in fire and thunder as Ferroclism's weapons began their deadly song.
Chapter 710. Guild War 2.
The night sky above Pyros erupted in flames as Ferroclism's orbital strike platforms unleashed their first volley. Mana-enhanced projectiles streaked toward the peaceful canyon city like falling stars, each one carrying enough destructive force to level a city block. Maxwell Von Pontes watched from his command center aboard the flagship Iron Dominion, his golden eyes reflecting the deadly light show below. His fingers gripped the tactical display's edge with white-knuckled intensity as he waited for the inevitable destruction. Arthur Nightingale had made his final mistake by leaving himself vulnerable, and now he would pay the ultimate price. Direct hits confirmed on target location, reported his weapons officer, her voice crisp with military precision. Calculating damage assessment. Maxwell allowed himself a cold smile. Excellent. Prepare for second volley. I want nothing left of that hotel but... The smile died on his lips. On the tactical display, the impact zones showed something impossible. Where there should have been devastation, where Ferroclism engineering should have carved molten craters into the earth, the building stood untouched. Intact. Protected. What? Maxwell breathed, leaning forward. Run the targeting analysis again. Check for system errors. Sir, targeting systems show green across all platforms, came the confused reply. Direct hits confirmed. But the damage readings don't match expected parameters. Maxwell's mind raced through possibilities. Defensive barriers were possible, but nothing should have been able to withstand that concentrated firepower. Unless, sir, another voice cut across the command deck. We're detecting massive energy signatures from the target area. Unknown technology, massive mana output. It's like nothing in our databases. Etherite. The word burned through Maxwell's consciousness like acid. He'd underestimated not just Arthur's strategic planning, but his technological capabilities. The boy hadn't just stolen Ferroclism's contracts. He'd made their weapons obsolete. Bring up the ground surveillance feeds, Maxwell commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. I want visual confirmation of the target area. Multiple holographic displays activated around the command center, showing high-resolution feeds from reconnaissance drones circling Pyros. The canyon city spread below them, its famous cave openings now glowing with an eerie blue light that definitely wasn't natural. The hotel where Arthur had been staying stood at the center of a shimmering energy field that rippled like water made of starlight. Maxwell's golden eyes widened as he recognized the defensive formations.
Impossible.
The energy requirements alone should have been beyond any portable system, yet there it was, a barrier that made Ferroclism's most advanced weapons look like children's toys. Launch the second volley, he ordered grimly. Full power. Overcharge the mana cores if necessary. Sir, overcharging risks. Do it. The orbital platforms hummed with increased energy as their weapon systems drew power beyond safe parameters. Warning lights flashed across the tactical displays as the weapons charged to levels that would have been considered suicidal under normal circumstances. The second volley launched with twice the destructive force of the first. Maxwell watched the projectiles streak toward their target, each one a miniature sun burning through the night sky. This time, surely the barriers would fall. They didn't. The defensive field absorbed the enhanced bombardment without so much as a flicker. If anything, it seemed to grow brighter, as if feeding on the energy directed against it. Maxwell's weapons, the pride of Ferroclism's engineering core, the tools that had maintained the guild's dominance for decades, might as well have been throwing stones. Impossible, Maxwell whispered, his complexion paling as the implications hit him. How could he have developed something this advanced without our intelligence networks detecting it? Before anyone could answer, every screen in the command center suddenly went dark. The silence that followed was deafening. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the command deck as backup systems struggled to compensate for what appeared to be a complete system failure. Maxwell's senior officers exchanged confused glances, their training inadequate for a situation this unprecedented. Then, one by one, the screens began flickering back to life. But instead of tactical displays and weapon readouts, they showed something else entirely. Arthur Nightingale's face. The young man appeared on every monitor throughout the command center, his azure eyes bright with intelligence and something that looked suspiciously like amusement. He was seated in what appeared to be a comfortable chair, completely relaxed despite the fact that orbital weapons had just been fired at his location. Behind him, Maxwell could see the warm interior of the hotel, untouched and peaceful. "Good evening, Maxwell," Arthur said, his voice somehow reaching them through their own communication systems. "I hope you're enjoying the light show. Quite impressive, really. I can see why the Slatemark military paid such premium prices for Ferroclism's weapons." Maxwell's hands clenched into fists as rage boiled through his veins. "How are you? Broadcasting through your own systems?" Arthur interrupted with a slight smile. "Oh, that's the beautiful thing about modern warfare, Maxwell. When everything is connected, everything becomes vulnerable. Your weapons platforms, your communication networks, your tactical computers, they're all running on systems that can be influenced, shall we say." As if to demonstrate his point, warning alarms began blaring throughout the command center. Weapon systems that had been charging for a third volley suddenly powered down. Navigation computers began displaying error messages. Even the environmental controls seemed to flicker uncertainly. "You see," Arthur continued conversationally, "while you've been spending decades perfecting bigger guns and more explosive projectiles, I've been working on something far more elegant. Information warfare, digital infiltration, the art of making your enemy's own tools work against them." Maxwell felt ice forming in his chest as the reality of his situation became clear. "You hacked our systems." "Hacked is such an ugly word," Arthur replied with mock offense. "I prefer to think of it as a comprehensive security audit. And I'm afraid your systems failed quite spectacularly." Arthur leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "Did you really think I would travel to the southern continent without taking precautions? That I would leave myself vulnerable to attack from a guild as predictably aggressive as Ferroclism?" The young man's hand came up and he pointed directly at the camera at Maxwell, with two fingers indicating his own eyes. The gesture was simple, unmistakable, and infuriating in its casual confidence. "I'm watching you," it said. "I see everything you're doing." Maxwell's vision tinged red with fury. The casual arrogance in that gesture, the implicit mockery of Ferroclism's technological superiority, the sheer audacity of hijacking their own systems to deliver the insult, it was beyond intolerable. "You think you're clever, boy?" Maxwell snarled at the screens. "You think technology is everything?" Arthur's smile widened slightly. "I think preparation is everything, Maxwell. And I've been preparing for this conversation for quite some time." The connection cut abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. The weight of what had just happened, the complete technological superiority Arthur had demonstrated, the casual way he'd neutralized their most advanced weapons, settled over them like a suffocating blanket. But Maxwell von Pontes hadn't built Ferroclism into one of the 12 great guilds by accepting defeat easily. "Sir," his aide ventured carefully. "Your orders." Maxwell straightened, his golden eyes burning with renewed determination. Arthur might have neutralized their weapons, might have infiltrated their systems, might have made their technological advantages irrelevant. But there was one thing the young guild master couldn't hack, couldn't influence through digital manipulation. Raw, overwhelming force. "Signal the mercenary teams," Maxwell commanded, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a man who had just shifted to an entirely different kind of warfare. "Full deployment. Every adventurer on our payroll, every contracted warrior, every hired blade. I want them on the ground in Pyros within the hour." "Sir, are you certain?" "The cost alone." "The cost is irrelevant," Maxwell cut him off sharply. "Arthur Nightingale has made one critical error in his calculations. He's focused so intently on technological superiority that he's forgotten the most basic principle of guild warfare." Maxwell's lips curved into a predatory smile as he watched the tactical display begin showing the deployment of Ferroclism's most dangerous assets. Not their weapons or their technology, but their people. Ascendant rank fighters, integration rank mages, specialists whose abilities couldn't be hacked or digitally compromised. Sometimes, Maxwell continued, the solution to a technological problem is remarkably simple. You send people who don't care about your computers or your clever little security systems. People who solve problems with steel and magic and raw determination. He activated the general communication channel, his voice carrying to every mercenary team preparing for deployment. Arthur Nightingale thinks he's won because he can manipulate our machines. Show him what happens when he faces warriors who don't need machines to kill. Meanwhile, in the peaceful comfort of the hotel's main lounge, Arthur Nightingale leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a satisfied smile. The holographic displays surrounding him showed exactly what he'd expected to see. Maxwell's forces scrambling to deploy ground troops after their technological assault had failed so spectacularly. Everything is proceeding exactly according to plan, Luna observed from within his consciousness, her mental voice carrying a note of impressed approval. Maxwell is predictable, Arthur replied silently, his fingers dancing across the virtual interface only he could see. When technology fails him, he'll default to overwhelming force. It's the response of someone who's never had to think beyond raw power. The real battle is about to begin, Luna noted. Arthur's smile widened as he watched the tactical projections update in real time. Maxwell's ground forces were already making the mistakes Arthur had anticipated, moving too quickly, assuming their numbers would be sufficient, underestimating the defensive advantages Arthur had spent so much time preparing. No, Arthur thought with quiet satisfaction. The real battle is already over. Maxwell just doesn't know it yet.
Chapter 711, Guild war 3.
I wasn't a fool. I knew that poking the bear known as Feroclism would result in them taking heavy action against me directly. And what better timing to attack than when I was in the southern continent, away from my guild and powerless. Feroclism did have the right to be arrogant after all. In terms of overall strength, they were stronger than Ouroboros. Their guild had centuries of accumulated power, resources, and expertise. Maxwell von Pontes himself was a mid-immortal ranker with decades of combat experience, while I was merely a high ascendant ranker who had achieved my position through political maneuvering rather than raw strength. There was no way I should be able to win this battle. Unfortunately, this battle was never meant to be fair. From my position on the inn's reinforced terrace, I watched through enhanced surveillance feeds as Feroclism's mercenary forces descended on Pyros like a plague of locusts. Over 3,000 combat specialists, ranging from white-rank foot soldiers to several ascendant-rank commanders. Each one handpicked from Feroclism's extensive roster of contracted killers. Maxwell had deployed overwhelming force, just as I'd predicted he would. The man was nothing if not predictable in his brutality. Everything is proceeding as expected, Luna observed from within my consciousness. Better than expected, I replied silently, my fingers dancing across the holographic interface only I could see. Maxwell's emotional state is making him sloppy. He's committed every available asset to this assault. Through my surveillance network, I watched the enemy forces spreading throughout the canyon city like oil across water. They moved with professional efficiency, securing landing zones and establishing perimeters with the kind of precision that came from extensive combat experience. They had no idea they were walking into a carefully prepared killing ground. I activated my communication array, sending coded signals to assets positioned throughout Pyros. Assets that had been in place for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. Phase 2 is now active, I announced quietly. All units, execute. The response was immediate and devastating. From concealed positions throughout the canyon, Arthur's true forces emerged like shadows given form. These weren't hired mercenaries or temporary allies. They were elite operatives from Ouroboros, Mount Hua, and the southern continent's own intelligence services. Each one personally selected and positioned by Arthur during the weeks of apparent vacation planning. Seraphina materialized from what had appeared to be empty air, her ice-blue eyes cold as winter storms as she surveyed the battlefield below. Her silver hair flowed like liquid mercury as she raised her hands, and the very air around her began to crystallize. I was beginning to think you'd never call for backup, she said with characteristic understatement, though there was warmth in her voice that spoke of genuine relief at finally being able to act. I wanted to see how far Maxwell would commit himself, I replied, watching my surveillance feeds as Feroclism forces began encountering unexpected resistance. The deeper he digs this hole, the harder it becomes for him to climb out. Reika appeared beside us with the fluid grace of flowing shadow, her violet eyes bright with anticipation and barely contained violence. Master, she said simply, though the single word carried volumes of devotion and readiness for battle. Reika, coordinate with our embedded teams. I want Feroclism's command structure disrupted before they realize what's happening. I paused, bringing up additional tactical displays. Seraphina, the eastern approach needs your particular talents. Those caves would benefit from some climate control. Both women nodded and vanished back into the night, moving to execute their assigned roles with the kind of precision that came from absolute trust and extensive preparation. Meanwhile, I turned my attention to a more delicate task. My fingers moved across virtual keyboards that existed only in my enhanced perception, diving deep into Feroclism's communication networks. Maxwell's emotional state had made him careless, Security protocols that should have been ironclad were left with glaring vulnerabilities, as he prioritized speed over caution. Within minutes, I had complete access to the Iron Dominion systems. The flagship was a marvel of Ferroclism engineering, bristling with enough firepower to level a city and protected by defensive systems that had never been breached in decades of service. Unfortunately for Maxwell, all of that technology depended on computer systems that were now under my control. I began my work with surgical precision, planting logic bombs in critical systems while simultaneously mapping the ship's structural weaknesses. The Iron Dominion was Maxwell's pride and joy, a symbol of Ferroclism's technological superiority that he'd brought to intimidate me. It was about to become his greatest humiliation. "Sir," came a panicked voice from my surveillance intercept of the flagship's communications. "We're detecting massive system intrusions across all networks. Someone's in our computers." Maxwell's response was a roar of pure fury that could be heard even through the electronic filter. "Find them. Cut all external connections. Isolate the core systems." Too late, Maxwell. Far too late. With a thought, I triggered the cascade failure I'd been preparing. The Iron Dominion's mighty engines suddenly reversed thrust while its maneuvering systems executed a series of impossible commands. Warning alarms screamed across the flagship as its own navigation computers began steering it toward an uncontrolled descent. But I wasn't finished. Through the ship's own surveillance cameras, I watched Maxwell frantically trying to regain control of his vessel. The man's golden eyes were wide with disbelief as century-old Ferroclism technology betrayed him at the most critical moment. I opened a communication channel, broadcasting my voice directly through the flagship's internal speakers. "Hello again, Maxwell," I said pleasantly. "I hope you're enjoying the flight. I took the liberty of updating your navigation software. Consider it a gift." On the screen, I watched Maxwell's face contort with rage as he realized the source of his technological betrayal. "Nightingale," he screamed, his voice echoing through the Iron Dominion's corridors. "I'll kill you myself." "You're welcome to try," I replied, watching with satisfaction as his flagship continued its inexorable descent toward the canyon floor. "Though I should mention that you'll want to handle the landing first. Your ship seems to be experiencing some technical difficulties." I cut the connection and turned my attention back to the ground battle, where my allies were systematically dismantling Ferroclism's assault force. Seraphina had transformed the eastern cave system into a frozen hellscape. Her movements were poetry in motion as she danced between enemy attacks. Reka flowed through the shadows like liquid death, appearing behind enemy commanders just long enough to eliminate them before vanishing again. And throughout it all, Prince Ian's voice could be heard coordinating the evacuation of civilians, while his family's elite guards secured Stella and the other non-combatants. Stella secure in the mountain bunkers. Ian's voice came through my communication array. Royal Guard escorts have her surrounded by enough protective magic to stop an army. She's probably safer there than anywhere else on the continent. Good. With Stella protected, I could focus entirely on the task at hand. I vaulted from the terrace, my body enhanced not by magical artifacts but by the natural strength that had allowed me to reach high ascendant rank despite my youth. The gap between my power and Maxwell's mid-immortal rank was substantial, but raw mana levels had never been the only measure of combat effectiveness. I landed in the midst of a group of integration rank mercenaries who had been advancing on the inn. Their weapons turned toward me with professional efficiency, but they moved like they were underwater compared to my enhanced reflexes. My first opponent swung a mana-enhanced blade that could have carved through steel. I sidestepped the attack and drove my palm into his solar plexus, sending him flying backward into his companions with enough force to crater the canyon wall behind them. The remaining mercenaries attacked as a coordinated unit, their varied magical abilities creating a storm of elemental destruction that should have overwhelmed any single opponent. Unfortunately for them, I'd spent years training against multiple opponents under conditions far more challenging than this. I moved through their attacks like a dancer performing a lethal ballet, each movement precisely calculated to avoid damage, while positioning me for devastating counterstrikes. Within seconds, the entire squad was down, their unconscious forms scattered across the canyon floor. More enemies approached from multiple directions, but I was no longer alone. Seraphina appeared at my left side, ice crystals swirling around her like a crown of winter. Her arrival was accompanied by a wave of freezing air that turned the moisture in the canyon into deadly projectiles. Reka materialized at my right, shadows coiling around her form like living armor. Her violet eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction as she surveyed the approaching enemies. "Ready?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Always," Seraphina replied, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of winter itself. "For you, Master," Reka added, her tone carrying the devotion of someone who would follow me into hell itself. Together, we advanced into the ranks of Ferroclism's forces like an avalanche of destruction. My enhanced strength allowed me to match opponents who technically outranked me, while Seraphina's ice swordsmanship and Reka's shadow swordsmanship provided perfect tactical support. We carved through their lines with systematic efficiency, each enemy falling before our coordinated assault. These weren't random acts of violence. This was surgical dismantling of Ferroclism's combat capability. Chapter 712. Guild War 4. The Iron Dominion crashed into the canyon floor with the sound of a dying god. Maxwell von Pontes pulled himself from the wreckage of his command center, red blood trickling from a gash across his forehead where a piece of shrapnel had found its mark. Around him, the mighty flagship's hull groaned and twisted, its once pristine corridors now a maze of sparking electronics and buckled metal. The crash that would have killed a dozen lesser men was merely an inconvenience to someone of his caliber, though the humiliation burned far worse than any physical wound. "Status report," he growled, activating his emergency communication device as he stumbled through the debris. Static answered him initially, then broken voices began filtering through the chaos. "Eastern squad completely eliminated. Ice blossoms everywhere. Can't advance. Shadows, they're coming from the shadows." Maxwell's jaw clenched as the true scope of the disaster became clear. His overwhelming force, 3,000 of the finest adventurers, was being systematically dismantled by what appeared to be a handful of opponents. Impossible. It was utterly impossible. But as Maxwell emerged from the crashed flagship's emergency exit, the evidence of that impossibility lay scattered across the canyon floor. Bodies of integration rank fighters who should have been more than capable of handling any reasonable opposition were strewn about like broken dolls. Their expensive equipment, their years of training, their hard-earned experience, all rendered meaningless by an enemy that fought with surgical precision. "Sir!" One of his surviving lieutenants rushed toward him, relief evident on the man's face at seeing Maxwell alive. "Thank the gods you're—" "How many?" Maxwell cut him off sharply. "Sir, how many are still combat effective?" The lieutenant's face paled as he consulted his tactical display. "Roughly 60% casualties, sir. Most of the white rank and integration rank forces are down. Some dead. Most severely injured and unable to continue fighting." Maxwell felt his blood pressure spike. 60% casualties, and they hadn't even engaged Arthur himself yet. These weren't random thugs they were losing. These were seasoned professionals who had survived countless conflicts. The ascendant rank fighters? Still operational, sir. Their enhanced constitutions allowed them to weather the initial assault better. But morale is... The lieutenant hesitated. "Poor, sir. Very poor." Maxwell surveyed the battlefield with his enhanced vision, picking out the forms of his stronger mercenaries as they regrouped among the canyon rocks. These were the elite, the cream of Ferroclism's fighters. Men and women who had reached the same basic rank as Arthur himself, each one a walking weapon capable of devastating destruction. They would have to be enough. "Signal full retreat for all integration rank and below," Maxwell commanded. "This fight is beyond their capabilities. Ascendant rank and above only from this point forward." As his lieutenant relayed the orders, Maxwell took stock of his remaining assets. 12 ascendant rank fighters, 3 approaching the threshold of immortal rank themselves, plus Maxwell's own mid-immortal rank power. Against a single high ascendant rank opponent, it should have been overwhelming. Should have been. But Arthur Nightingale had already proven that conventional tactical thinking meant nothing in this conflict. Maxwell was preparing to advance toward the main battle when the air around them suddenly grew thick with mana. The atmosphere itself seemed to shimmer as massive amounts of magical energy coalesced into recognizable patterns. 7 circle spells. Multiple ones all forming simultaneously. Defensive positions. Maxwell roared, his own mana flaring to life around him like golden fire. The spells materialized with devastating beauty. Pillars of flame that could melt steel, lances of ice that could pierce mountain stone, bolts of pure lightning that turned night into day. 7 circle magic, the domain of master mages and ascendant rank specialists, rained down on them with the fury of a magical apocalypse. Maxwell's hands moved in complex patterns as he began weaving his counterspell. 8 circle magic flowed from him like liquid starlight, his immortal rank mana reserves allowing him to reach heights of magical complexity that few beings on the continent could match. "Aegis Imperialis Maxima," he intoned, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. A dome of golden energy erupted around him and his surviving forces, its surface rippling like liquid metal as it intercepted the incoming 7 circle spells. Fire, ice, and lightning crashed against his barrier like waves against a cliff, each impact sending cascades of magical sparks across the canyon walls. Maxwell's defense held firm. His 8 circle magic was simply superior. More complex, more powerful, more refined than anything a 7 circle caster could produce. The attacking spells dissipated harmlessly against his golden aegis, their energy absorbed and redirected into the canyon floor. "Is that the best you can do, Nightingale?" Maxwell called out, his voice amplified by his magical aura. 7 circle spells against an immortal ranker? I expected better from the boy genius who thinks he can challenge Ferroclism. The magical bombardment ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the crackling of residual energy. Maxwell maintained his defensive spell while scanning the surrounding terrain for signs of his opponents. His enhanced senses picked up traces of mana signatures moving through the canyon, but nothing concrete enough to target. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement at the edge of his peripheral vision. Maxwell spun toward the disturbance, his 8 circle barrier shifting to intercept whatever attack was coming. His golden dome of energy was impenetrable, a masterwork of defensive magic that had never been breached in all his years of... The blade came through the barrier like it was made of mist. Not around it, not over it, through it, as if the 8 circle magic simply didn't exist. Maxwell's eyes widened in shock as he found himself staring at 3 feet of dark steel protruding through what should have been an impregnable defense. The sword moved with liquid grace, tracing a perfect arc that carved through his barrier like paper, leaving a trail of what looked like liquid shadow in its wake. The magical dome collapsed instantly, its complex patterns unraveling as the blade's passage disrupted the fundamental structure of the spell. 8-circle magic, the pride of immortal rank casters, fell apart like a child's toy. Behind the sword stood a figure that seemed to emerge from the darkness itself. Reika's violet hair flowed like silk in the canyon breeze, but it was her skin that drew Maxwell's stunned attention. Dark ink patterns covered her exposed arms and face. Not tattoos, but something far more profound. The markings moved and shifted across her flesh like living things, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. They seemed to drink in the ambient light, creating an aura of absolute darkness around her form. Her violet eyes held no mercy, no hesitation, only the cold certainty of someone who had found their target. "I will kill you for my master," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet finality of a death sentence. Maxwell stumbled backward, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. His 8-circle barrier had been one of his greatest achievements, a defensive spell that had taken him decades to perfect. For someone to simply cut through it with a sword. She moved toward him with predatory grace, each step leaving brief impressions of absolute darkness on the stone beneath her feet. The ink patterns on her skin pulsed brighter, and Maxwell realized with growing horror that they weren't just decorative. They were conduits, channels for power that he couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Sir!" one of his ascendant rank fighters called out, moving to intercept the approaching assassin. "I'll handle." The words died in the man's throat as darkness erupted around them like a living thing. It wasn't normal shadow. This was darkness given substance, darkness with weight and presence that pressed against Maxwell's enhanced senses like a physical force. The very air seemed to thicken, becoming viscous and oppressive as reality itself began to warp. Through the expanding darkness, Maxwell caught glimpses of architectural impossibilities. Crumbling towers that reached toward a starless sky, ancient ruins carved from black stone, corridors that led to places that shouldn't exist. The canyon floor was transforming, overlaying itself with something far older and infinitely more terrible. The necropolis of forgotten wisdom. Arthur Nightingale emerged from the heart of the darkness, but he was no longer entirely human. Massive wings had unfurled from his back. Not the feathered appendages of birds, but something far more magnificent and terrible. Each wing was easily 12 feet in span, covered in feathers so dark they seemed to absorb light itself. They moved with impossible grace, stirring air that carried the scent of ancient tombs and forgotten knowledge. His azure eyes now held depths that seemed to contain entire universes of shadow and starlight. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond human hearing, creating an almost hypnotic effect that made Maxwell's bones vibrate. "Welcome to my domain," Arthur said, his transformed presence radiating power that made Maxwell's immortal rank aura seem pale by comparison. "Here, the rules are different. Here, death and knowledge are the same thing." The darkness completed its transformation of the battlefield, revealing the true nature of Arthur's power. They were no longer standing in the singing caves of Pyros. They were standing in a necropolis that existed somewhere beyond the normal boundaries of reality. Ancient mausoleums rose from the transformed ground like silent sentinels, their surfaces covered in hieroglyphs that hurt to look at directly. Between them wandered shapes that might once have been human, their forms wrapped in shadows and carrying scrolls that whispered secrets in languages that predated civilization. Arthur's dark wings stretched wider, each feather catching light that came from no visible source.
Chapter 713. Guild war 5.
Maxwell's golden eyes glinted with desperate calculation as he felt the oppressive weight of Arthur's necropolis pressing down on reality itself. The impossible architecture surrounding them defied every law of magic he understood. But Maxwell von Pontes hadn't reached mid-immortal rank by accepting defeat easily. A domain, he realized, his mind racing through tactical options. The boy has manifested a domain despite not reaching immortal rank. A domain born out of a gift. Domains were the ultimate expression of magical mastery, personal realities imposed upon the world through sheer force of will and mana. They were supposed to be the exclusive province of immortal rankers, beings who had transcended mortal limitations to touch something approaching divinity. Yet Arthur Nightingale was able to create a supernatural domain through the use of a gift. Maxwell's hands began moving in the complex patterns required for his own domain manifestation. If Arthur wanted to play with ultimate techniques, Maxwell would show him what centuries of experience could accomplish. His personal domain, the Forge of Golden Supremacy, would overlay this necropolis with pure immortal rank authority, crushing the upstart's borrowed power through sheer superiority. But he didn't get the chance. Reika struck like liquid shadow made manifest, her dark blade carving through the air with lethal precision. Maxwell's enhanced reflexes allowed him to react, golden mana flaring around him as he raised a barrier of pure energy to intercept her attack. Not heavy, Maxwell thought as her sword met his magical defense. The impact carried force, certainly, but nothing approaching what an immortal ranker should fear. Her strength was merely that of a mid-ascendant ranker, perhaps enhanced by whatever supernatural abilities she possessed, but fundamentally limited by mortal constraints. So then why had she cut through his 8-circle barrier as if it were made of paper? The question nagged at him, but Maxwell pushed it aside. He had more pressing concerns than understanding the mechanics of her unusual abilities. He needed to establish his domain before Arthur's necropolis could fully solidify its hold on reality. Maxwell began weaving the intricate spell patterns required for domain manifestation, his hands moving with the precision of decades of practice. Golden circles of light began forming in the air around him, each one inscribed with formulae that represented fundamental aspects of reality itself. Power, authority, supremacy, the core concepts that defined his personal approach to magic. Reika pressed her attack, her blade whistling through the air in patterns that seemed to drink light from the very atmosphere. But Maxwell was an immortal ranker. Even while casting, his defensive capabilities far exceeded what any ascendant ranker could overcome. He deflected her strikes with casual flicks of magical force, maintaining his focus on the growing complexity of his domain circles. Just as the final pattern was about to lock into place, something else entered the battle. It came without warning, without visible manifestation, but with the crushing weight of absolute authority. Maxwell felt it like a physical blow, not to his body, but to his very essence as a magical being. Every circle he had carefully constructed simply dissolved, not dispelled, not overwhelmed. They simply ceased to exist, as if something of incomprehensible power had decided that Maxwell's magic was not permitted to function. What? Maxwell's thoughts scattered as he felt the full weight of what was happening to him. This wasn't magic. This was something far more fundamental. This was authority, the kind of power that didn't need to overcome his defenses because it operated on a level where his defenses simply didn't matter. And he knew exactly what it was. Tiamat. The radiant dragon's presence pressed down on him like the weight of mountains, though she was nowhere to be seen. This was her authority reaching across vast distances, declaring that Maxwell's magic would not function as long as she willed it otherwise. Dragons didn't need to be physically present to exert their influence, not when they reached the level of a radiant ranker. Impossible, Maxwell gasped, staggering as Reika's next attack carved through his hastily erected barriers like they were made of mist. But even as he denied it, Maxwell knew the truth. Arthur had somehow secured the backing of one of the most powerful beings in the world. The radiant dragon's authority was making it impossible for Maxwell to access his full magical capabilities. Reika didn't waste the opportunity. Her blade danced through the air with renewed aggression, each strike carrying the weight of absolute dedication. But more than that, Maxwell began to notice changes in her physical capabilities that defied explanation. The dark ink patterns covering her skin pulsed with increasing intensity, and with each pulse, her speed increased, her strength grew, her reflexes sharpened. Her gift, Maxwell realized with growing alarm. Those markings aren't decorative. They're a supernatural enhancement system. Reika's gift appeared to be some form of progressive enhancement tied to the ink patterns on her skin. Each marking that darkened brought her closer to Maxwell's level of capability, closing the vast gulf that should have existed between an ascendant ranker and an immortal ranker. Combined with Tiamat's authority crushing his magical abilities, Maxwell found himself facing an opponent who could actually threaten him. Reika's blade found its mark, carving a shallow cut across Maxwell's cheek. Golden blood welled from the wound, proof that his supposedly impenetrable defenses were failing under the combined pressure of draconic authority and supernatural enhancement. Impossible, Maxwell snarled, touching the wound with disbelief. I am immortal rank. You cannot. I can, and I will. Reika interrupted, her violet eyes burning with fanatic devotion. For my master, I will surpass any limitation. The ink patterns on her skin flared brighter, and Maxwell felt her next attack coming with the force of a natural disaster. He barely managed to deflect the blow, his crude energy manipulation techniques straining under the pressure of her enhanced abilities. Meanwhile, throughout the necropolis, Arthur was demonstrating exactly why domains were considered the ultimate expression of magical mastery. His wings of eclipse spread wider, each dark feather seeming to exist in multiple places simultaneously. As the feathers drifted through the impossible architecture of his necropolis, they carried with them extensions of Arthur's consciousness, thousands of points of awareness that allowed him to perceive every corner of his domain with perfect clarity. The surviving ascendant rank fighters from Feroclism found themselves trapped in a maze where their opponent knew their every move before they made it. Arthur appeared behind one fighter, materializing from the shadow of a falling feather with his technique called Feather Step, his sword glowing with astral energy as he struck the man from behind, collapsing him in one strike. Another attacker tried to flank Arthur from above, leaping between the twisted spires of the necropolis with enhanced agility. But Arthur was already gone, stepping through shadow to emerge from a different feather's darkness. His counterattack sent the would-be assassin crashing through an ancient mausoleum wall, the impact strong enough to crack stone that had endured for millennia. A group of 3 fighters tried to coordinate their assault, combining their abilities in a technique that should have overwhelmed any single opponent. Fire, lightning, and ice converged on Arthur's position with devastating precision. They struck empty air. Arthur emerged from their own shadows, his dark wings folding around him like a cloak of living darkness. You're fighting the domain itself, he explained with academic precision as his hand touched each attacker in turn. Every shadow, Every whisper of wind, every grain of dust. They're all extensions of my will here. The three fighters collapsed in sequence, their consciousness torn from their bodies and absorbed into the necropolis itself. They weren't dead. Arthur had no need for such crude solutions. But they would remain trapped in his domain until he chose to release them. One by one, the elite forces that Maxwell had deployed with such confidence fell to Arthur's overwhelming tactical superiority. In his own domain, enhanced by the wings of Eclipse and the Featherstep technique, Arthur was effectively omnipresent and omniscient. No strategy could succeed against an opponent who could be everywhere at once and see every possible angle of attack. Within minutes, only Maxwell remained conscious among Ferroclism's forces. And Maxwell was discovering that fighting without his full magical abilities was a far more challenging proposition than he had anticipated. Reika's blade carved another line across his armor, the dark steel somehow finding gaps in defenses that should have been absolute. The ink patterns on her skin now covered nearly her entire visible form, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat and seemed to draw power from the necropolis itself. You cannot win, she said with quiet certainty, her enhanced speed allowing her to press attacks that Maxwell could barely counter. My master has prepared for every possibility. Your defeat was inevitable from the moment you chose to attack. Maxwell roared in frustration, pouring more energy into his crude defensive techniques. Without access to his sophisticated magical abilities, he was reduced to the kind of raw power applications that he hadn't used since his early days as an integration ranker. It was like trying to perform surgery with a sledgehammer, possible in theory, but inefficient beyond measure. I am Maxwell von Pontes, he declared, golden energy flaring around him like a miniature sun. Guild Master of Ferroclism. I will not be defeated by some upstart servant. But even as he spoke the words, Maxwell could feel his situation deteriorating. Tiamat's authority continued to suppress his magical sophistication, while Reika's gift-enhanced abilities grew stronger with each passing moment. The combination was slowly but inevitably overwhelming his defenses.
Chapter 714. Guild war 6.
The ancient mausoleums of Arthur's necropolis echoed with the sound of steel meeting magical energy as Reika pressed her relentless assault against Maxwell. Each clash sent sparks of dark and golden light cascading through the impossible architecture, illuminating hieroglyphs that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. Maxwell was beginning to understand the true scope of his predicament. Stripped of his sophisticated magical techniques by Tiamat's overwhelming authority, he was fighting like a common integration ranker, powerful but crude. Meanwhile, Reika's supernatural gift continued to enhance her capabilities, the ink patterns on her skin now forming intricate mandalas that pulsed with borrowed power from the necropolis itself. Yield, Reika commanded, her violet eyes burning with fanatic devotion as her blade traced arcs through the air that left brief afterimages of absolute darkness. My master has already won. Your forces are defeated, your technology subverted, your reputation destroyed. What purpose does continued resistance serve? I would rather die than yield to that arrogant child, Maxwell snarled, marshalling his remaining energy for a desperate counterattack. Golden mana erupted from his form like liquid fire, crude but overwhelming in its raw intensity. The explosion of power sent Reika skidding backward across the necropolis floor, her enhanced reflexes barely allowing her to maintain her footing. For a moment, the fundamental difference in their base power levels became apparent. Maxwell was still an immortal ranker, even if he couldn't access his full capabilities. But before Maxwell could press his temporary advantage, the temperature around them began to plummet. Ice crystals formed in the air itself, creating geometric patterns of impossible beauty that refracted the necropolis's eldritch light into prismatic rainbows. The moisture in Maxwell's breath began to freeze even as he exhaled, and frost began spreading across the ancient stone beneath their feet with the sound of breaking glass. From the shadows between two massive tomb monuments, Seraphina emerged like winter given form. The half-elven princess of Mount Hua moved with the fluid grace of falling snow, her silver hair flowing behind her like liquid mercury, as ice magic swirled around her form in patterns that resembled blooming flowers. Her ice-blue eyes held depths that spoke of mountain peaks and eternal winter, while her elegant robes seemed to be cut from crystallized moonlight itself. The plum blossom blooms even in winter's harshest embrace, Seraphina said, her voice carrying the musical quality of wind through pine forests. Maxwell von Pontes, your spring has ended. She raised her hands, and the very air began to crystallize around them. Not crude ice magic like some common mage might wield, but something far more refined, a manipulation of thermal energy so precise that it bordered on artistry. Delicate flowers of ice began forming throughout the space, each one a perfect replica of the plum blossoms that were Mount Hua's symbol. But these were not mere decorations. Each crystalline flower was a focus point for Seraphina's magic, a node in a complex array that began to exert influence over the battlefield itself. The temperature continued to drop, but selectively, the air around Maxwell grew thick and sluggish, while the space around Reika remained perfectly comfortable. 2 against 1, Maxwell observed with bitter humor, his golden blood slowly freezing where Reika's blade had marked him. How very practical of Arthur to arrange such overwhelming odds. This is not about fairness, Seraphina replied, her elegant features remaining composed even as devastating magical energies swirled around her. This is about consequences. You chose to attack civilians. You chose to threaten a child. You chose to bring war to our peaceful gathering. Her hands moved in patterns that seemed to echo the movements of dancers in some ancient court ceremony, each gesture causing more ice flowers to bloom throughout the space. The crystalline blossoms began to resonate with each other, creating a harmony that was felt rather than heard, a vibration that seemed to penetrate to the very core of Maxwell's being. Now you will learn what happens when you threaten what we protect, Seraphina continued, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of avalanches and glacier movements. Maxwell found himself facing a coordinated assault that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Reika attacked with her enhanced physical capabilities, her dark blade carving patterns through the air that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond normal comprehension. Meanwhile, Seraphina's ice magic created an ever-changing battlefield where Maxwell's mobility was constantly restricted, while his opponents moved with perfect freedom. The plum blossom ice flowers weren't merely decorative, they were tactical instruments. Each bloom could redirect the path of Reika's attacks, allowing her to strike from impossible angles. They could create barriers that channeled Maxwell's movements into predetermined patterns. Most insidiously, they began to slowly drain the heat from his body, reducing his reaction speed and making his crude magical techniques even more unwieldy. Impossible! Maxwell gasped as Reika's blade found another gap in his defenses, this time carving a deep furrow across his ribs. Two ascendant rankers cannot defeat an immortal ranker, even with external assistance. But even as he spoke, Maxwell knew his words were becoming less true with each passing moment. Reika's gift-enhanced abilities had elevated her to near-immortal levels of capability, while Seraphina's ice magic was creating environmental conditions that negated many of his advantages. Combined with Tiamat's authority suppressing his magical sophistication, the fight was becoming increasingly one-sided. The coordinated assault from Reika and Seraphina had evolved into something approaching artistic perfection. Reika's enhanced swordsmanship carved patterns through the air that seemed to follow the same geometric principles as Seraphina's ice flowers, creating a harmony of movement that was beautiful to observe and devastating to experience. Maxwell's immortal rank constitution allowed him to survive wounds that would have killed lesser beings, but the accumulated damage was beginning to tell. Golden blood from dozens of cuts painted abstract patterns across his armor, while the gradual heat drain from Seraphina's magic was making his movements increasingly sluggish. This is taking too long, Reika observed, her violet eyes analyzing Maxwell's defensive patterns with tactical precision. Master will want to conclude this soon. Agreed, Seraphina replied, her ice blue gaze measuring the distance between herself and their opponent. The final movement approaches. The two women exchanged a look of perfect understanding, then moved with coordination that spoke of extensive practice. Reika's assault became a controlled retreat, drawing Maxwell forward into a position precisely defined by Seraphina's ice flower array. Maxwell, desperate to press what he thought was an advantage, followed exactly as they had predicted. Too late, he realized his error. Seraphina's hands moved in the final pattern of her technique, and every ice flower in the array resonated simultaneously. The temperature around Maxwell didn't just drop, it plummeted to levels that would have flash-frozen normal matter. His movements became locked in place as the moisture in the air around him crystallized into restraining bonds of perfect ice. Reika's blade moved with enhanced precision, the dark steel carving through Maxwell's immobilized defenses to find the gaps in his armor with surgical accuracy. But instead of striking to kill, she aimed for specific pressure points that would disrupt his magical energy flow even further. Maxwell found himself trapped, wounded, and increasingly unable to mount any effective resistance. It was at this moment that Arthur chose to make his entrance. The guild master of Ouroboros emerged from the shadow cast by the largest mausoleum in his necropolis, his wings of eclipse folding around him like a cloak woven from midnight itself. His azure eyes held depths that seemed to contain the wisdom of ages, while his transformed presence radiated authority that made reality itself bend in his vicinity. In his hand, he carried a blade that seemed to be forged from crystallized darkness, not merely black, but actively consuming light in a way that hurt to observe directly. The weapon hummed with power that resonated with the necropolis itself, as if it were less a tool and more an extension of Arthur's will-given physical form. Maxwell von Pontes, Arthur said, his voice carrying harmonics that echoed through dimensions beyond the merely physical. Guild Master of Feroclism, you came to my sanctuary seeking to destroy what I protect. Maxwell struggled against Seraphina's ice restraints, his golden eyes burning with rage and frustration. You, start. This isn't over. Feroclism will never. Feroclism is finished, Arthur interrupted with calm certainty. Your guild, your reputation, your power, all of it ends tonight. But you have one final role to play. Arthur approached with measured steps, his dark blade singing with anticipation. Maxwell's immortal rank constitution meant that simple death would not be sufficient. His body could regenerate from wounds that would destroy lesser beings. But Arthur's weapon was designed for more than mere physical destruction. With surgical precision, Arthur drove the dark blade through Maxwell's heart. The guild master of Feroclism gasped, golden blood spilling from his lips as the weapon's supernatural properties began to take effect. His immortal rank regeneration attempted to heal the wound, but the blade's magic prevented the damaged tissue from repairing itself. Maxwell von Pontes, one of the most powerful individuals on the continent, found himself facing the one thing his enhanced constitution couldn't overcome, a wound that would not heal, delivered by an opponent who understood death itself as a fundamental force of reality. As darkness began to close around the edges of his vision, Maxwell's final thought was a recognition of the completeness of his defeat. Arthur Nightingale hadn't just won the battle. He had orchestrated every aspect of the conflict from beginning to end, turning Maxwell's own strengths against him with surgical precision. The Guild War was over, and with it, the age of Feroclism's dominance had come to an end.
Chapter 715. Guild war 7.
The morning sun cast long shadows across the ruins of what had once been Feroclism's pride. The Iron Dominion lay broken against the canyon floor like the carcass of some technological beast. Around it, the cleanup crews from both Ouroboros and the Southern Continent's emergency services worked with methodical efficiency, cataloging the wreckage and ensuring that no sensitive materials fell into unauthorized hands. Arthur stood on the hotel's reconstructed terrace. The necropolis had faded with the dawn, leaving behind only the peaceful singing caves of Pyros and the memory of supernatural terror that had consumed Maxwell's forces. In his hand, he held a holographic document that represented the formal conclusion of their conflict. The Guild Council has reached its decision, Arthur read aloud for the benefit of his assembled advisors. Due to Feroclism's unprovoked assault on civilian territory and the subsequent defeat of their forces, all Guild assets, territories, and contractual obligations are hereby transferred to Ouroboros under the right of conquest. Reika stood beside him, her violet eyes bright with satisfaction, as she reviewed additional legal documents on her own display. The dark ink patterns on her skin had faded back to their normal subtle markings, her gift dormant now that the immediate threat had passed. The paperwork is remarkably straightforward, Master. Feroclism's lawyers seem eager to finalize the transfer before additional penalties can be assessed. Self-preservation, Arthur observed with dry amusement. They recognized that further resistance would only make their situation worse. Maxwell's defeat was so complete that even his own board of directors is abandoning his legacy to save what they can. The implications were staggering. Overnight, Ouroboros had essentially doubled in size, absorbing one of the 12 great guilds along with all their resources, research facilities, and technological assets. Arthur was no longer merely the guild master of a rising organization. He was now the controller of what amounted to a significant portion of the Central Continent's military-industrial complex. The integration process will take months, Reika continued, scrolling through the seemingly endless list of assets now under Arthur's control. Feroclism had operations all over the empire, with over 50,000 employees and contractors. Their research division alone has been working on projects that could revolutionize multiple industries. Priority assessment? Arthur asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Aetheryte integration across all applicable technologies, Reika replied immediately. Feroclism's conventional weapons and defense systems are impressive, but they're fundamentally limited by traditional energy sources. Combining their engineering expertise with our Aetheryte applications could produce results that exceed both organizations' individual capabilities. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. The victory over Feroclism had been more than just a demonstration of power. It was proof of concept for his eventual domination of all 12 great guilds. If he could absorb and integrate Feroclism's assets successfully, it would provide a template for dealing with the remaining 11. What about personnel? He asked. Mixed results, Reika admitted. Roughly 30% of Feroclism's workforce has requested transfer to other organizations rather than work under Ouroboros management. However, the majority seem willing to adapt, especially given the generous retention packages we're offering. And Maxwell's inner circle? Reika's expression darkened slightly. Those who participated in the assault on civilian territory are facing criminal charges through both Southern Continent and Imperial courts. The rest are being offered positions appropriate to their skills, but with significantly reduced authority. None of them will be in positions where they could undermine our operations. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Prince Ian, whose red hair caught the morning sunlight as he approached with his characteristic energetic stride. Behind him walked a group that made Arthur's heart skip a beat. His daughter Stella, flanked by 2 of the Southern Continent's elite royal guards who had kept her safe during the night's violence. "Daddy!" Stella called out, breaking free from her escorts to run toward Arthur with the kind of desperate relief that only came from a child who had been genuinely frightened for her parents' safety. Arthur caught her in his arms, lifting her off the ground in a fierce embrace that spoke to fears he hadn't allowed himself to fully acknowledge during the battle. Holding his daughter safe against his chest, feeling her small hands grip his shirt with desperate strength, Arthur was reminded of exactly what he had been fighting to protect. "I was so scared," Stella whispered against his shoulder. "The ground shook so much, and there were all those loud noises. And Prince Ian said you were fighting bad people who wanted to hurt us." "It's over now," Arthur murmured, stroking her dark hair with gentle fingers. "The bad people are gone, and they won't be coming back. You're safe, sweetheart. We're all safe." He held her for a long moment, letting the simple comfort of her presence wash away the residual darkness from the night's supernatural violence. In his arms, Stella represented everything pure and innocent in the world. Everything worth fighting for, everything worth protecting against the ambitions of men like Maxwell von Pontes. "Are we going home now?" Stella asked, finally pulling back to look at him with eyes that held too much understanding for someone her age. Yes, Arthur replied, smoothing down her rumpled hair. It's time to go home. As if summoned by his words, Serafina appeared from the direction of the guest quarters, her silver hair flowing like liquid silk in the morning breeze. She moved with her characteristic composed grace, but Arthur could see the subtle signs of emotional strain around her ice-blue eyes. The battle had affected all of them, even someone as seemingly unflappable as the half-elven princess. The transportation arrangements are complete, she reported, though her gaze lingered on Arthur with an intensity that spoke to concerns beyond mere logistics. Your private aircraft is prepared for departure whenever you're ready. Arthur gently set Stella down, keeping one hand on her shoulder as he turned to face Serafina fully. Thank you for everything. Last night could have gone very differently without your assistance. It was my pleasure, Serafina replied, though the slight hesitation in her voice suggested there were things she wanted to say that couldn't be expressed in front of others. Will you be very busy when you return home? She asked after a moment, her tone carefully neutral despite the obvious personal interest behind the question. Arthur considered the question seriously. With Feroclism's absorption into Ouroboros, his responsibilities had expanded exponentially. There would be integration meetings, personnel assessments, technology evaluations, and strategic planning sessions that could easily consume every waking hour for the next several months. Somewhat, he admitted. Absorbing Feroclism is only the beginning. There are still 11 other diamond rank guilds that need to be addressed. Each one will require different approaches, different strategies. Serafina nodded with understanding, though Arthur caught a flicker of something that might have been disappointment in her expression. The path to Guild Grandmaster was never going to be simple. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both aware that their time together was drawing to a close. Around them, the bustle of departure preparations continued. Luggage being loaded, final security sweeps being conducted, transportation schedules being coordinated. Arthur, Serafina said quietly, stepping closer so that their conversation wouldn't be overheard. Before you leave. She moved with fluid grace, closing the distance between them until she was near enough that he could smell the subtle fragrance of winter flowers that always seemed to surround her. Her ice-blue eyes held depths of emotion that her normally composed demeanor rarely revealed. I want you to know, she continued, her voice carrying the musical quality that made every word sound like poetry, that whatever challenges await you, whatever obstacles the other guilds present, you don't have to face them alone. Before Arthur could respond, Serafina rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. It lasted only a moment, but in that brief contact, Arthur felt the full depth of her feelings. Concern for his safety, pride in his accomplishments, and an underlying current of affection that had grown stronger with each shared experience. When they separated, Serafina's cheeks held a faint flush that made her ethereal beauty seem more vibrantly human. Feel free to ask for my help whenever you need it, she said, her voice slightly breathless. Mount Hua's resources are at your disposal, as am I. I'll remember that, Arthur replied, his own voice rough with emotion. More than you know. They shared another moment of silent understanding before the practical demands of departure forced them apart. Serafina stepped back, her composed mask sliding back into place though warmth remained in her eyes. Travel safely, she said, the simple words carrying weight beyond their literal meaning. You as well, Arthur replied. The Eastern continent is fortunate to have you. The farewells that followed were efficient but tinged with genuine affection. Prince Ian embraced Arthur with the enthusiasm of someone who had thoroughly enjoyed their shared adventure, already making plans for future visits and potential collaborations between their respective territories. This won't be the last time our paths cross, Ian declared with his characteristic confidence. The southern continent has gained a valuable ally in Ouroboros, and I intend to make sure that relationship continues to benefit both our peoples. Reika supervised the final loading of their luggage with her usual meticulous attention to detail, ensuring that every piece of equipment and every sensitive document was properly secured for the journey home. Her efficiency was comforting in its familiarity. Some things never changed, regardless of how dramatically the political landscape shifted. As their aircraft lifted off from the southern continent's crystal-enhanced landing platform, Arthur found himself reflecting on everything that had changed in just a few short days. He had arrived as the guild master of a rising organization seeking to establish trade relationships. He was leaving as the controller of 2 major guilds and the effective ruler of a significant portion of the continent's economic infrastructure. Through the aircraft's panoramic windows, he watched the southern continent's landscape fall away beneath them, the crystal spires of Verdania gleaming in the distance, the peaceful canyon of Pyros already returning to its normal tourist activities, the vast mountain ranges that housed ancient secrets and powerful allies. Stella had fallen asleep in her seat, exhausted by the emotional strain of the past day. Arthur gently adjusted her blanket, marveling again at the simple trust she placed in him to keep her safe from the dangers that seemed to follow his ambitions. Beside him, Reika was already deep in preliminary planning documents, her violet eyes bright with anticipation, as she began mapping out the integration process that would transform 2 separate organizations into a unified whole. The other guilds will have taken notice, she observed quietly, not looking up from her work. Word of Feroclism's defeat will spread quickly through the diplomatic networks. Good, Arthur replied, settling back in his seat as the aircraft turned toward the central continent. Let them take notice. Let them understand what happens to those who threaten what I protect. Below them, the vast ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its surface reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror made of liquid gold. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay home, and with it, the next phase of Arthur's campaign to reshape the guild system entirely. The guild war with Feroclism was over, but the larger war for supremacy among the 12 great guilds was just beginning. And Arthur Nightingale intended to win. Chapter 7:16. Price of Victory 1. 2 weeks had passed since the destruction of Feroclism, and the skyline of Avalon stretched before me like a testament to ambition made manifest. From my penthouse office atop the Ouroboros Tower, I could see the entire capital city of the central continent spread below. A sprawling metropolis of gleaming spires, maglev transit lines, and holographic displays that painted the evening sky in brilliant colors. The integration of Feroclism's assets had proceeded exactly according to my calculations. What had once been two separate organizations was rapidly becoming a unified empire of technological innovation and economic power. Overnight, Ouroboros had gained manufacturing facilities on 4 continents, research laboratories housing some of the brightest minds in applied magic, and contracts that would ensure steady revenue streams for the next decade. Targeting Feroclism first had been the logical choice. They were the strongest of the diamond rank guilds in terms of pure combat capability. If I had allowed them to remain while systematically dismantling weaker organizations, they would have inevitably become a rallying point for resistance. Better to eliminate the greatest threat early, before the others could fully comprehend what they were facing. But the victory had come with complications I was still managing. Not all of Feroclism's personnel had chosen integration with Ouroboros. Intelligence reports indicated that roughly 20% of their former workforce had simply disappeared from the industry entirely, either retiring early or relocating to other continents to avoid association with the defeated guild. These were acceptable losses. More concerning were the defections. Another 15% had been recruited by the remaining diamond rank guilds, taking their expertise and inside knowledge of Feroclism's operations with them. Luminalise had gained several key energy researchers. Skyvale had absorbed most of Feroclism's logistics specialists, and Orstrade had welcomed their financial analysts with open arms. In the short term, this exodus had strengthened my enemies. They now possessed detailed intelligence about Feroclism's capabilities and, by extension, some insight into how Ouroboros operated. But in the long term, I viewed it as another calculated advantage. These defectors carried with them the psychological impact of Feroclism's total defeat, a constant reminder to their new employers of what awaited organizations that opposed me too directly. "You're being unusually reflective," Luna observed from within my consciousness, her mental voice carrying a note of curiosity. "Second thoughts about the campaign ahead?" "Not second thoughts," I replied silently, watching as the latest group of former Feroclism engineers concluded their orientation tour of the Ouroboros headquarters. "But I'm not fool enough to believe our victory was entirely due to superior strategy. It was an uncomfortable truth I hadn't shared with anyone, not even my closest advisors. The battle at Pyros had been won through a combination of careful planning, technological superiority, and supernatural assistance that I couldn't guarantee would be available for future conflicts. Tiamat's intervention had been decisive in ways that most observers didn't fully understand. Her draconic authority hadn't just suppressed Maxwell's magical abilities. It had fundamentally altered the nature of the battlefield itself. Without that intervention, Maxwell's immortal rank capabilities might have allowed him to escape even after his defeat, regrouping with Feroclism's broader assets to wage a prolonged campaign of resistance. More troubling was the intelligence I'd received after the battle. Maxwell had deployed only 60% of Feroclism's total military assets to Pyros. The remaining 40% had been held in reserve, apparently as part of a broader strategic deployment that my attack had disrupted. If he had brought his full force to bear, if he had been more patient and methodical in his approach, the outcome might have been very different, Luna finished, reading the direction of my thoughts. "Exactly," I acknowledged. "We won because Maxwell was emotional, because he underestimated us, and because we had advantages he couldn't predict or counter. None of those factors are likely to apply to the remaining 11 guilds." The other diamond rank guilds had watched Feroclism's destruction with the kind of analytical attention that would make them far more dangerous opponents. They would study every aspect of the battle, identify every weakness in Maxwell's approach, and adapt their strategies accordingly. They wouldn't make the same mistakes he had, which meant I needed to evolve as well. I turned from the window as my office's security system announced an incoming visitor. The familiar pattern of chimes told me it was Stella, right on schedule for our evening conversation. "Daddy," she said as the doors slid open, her small form framed by the corridor's ambient lighting. She carried her usual mug of hot chocolate, but her expression was more serious than usual. "Are you planning another war?" The directness of her question never failed to catch me off guard. Stella had always been perceptive beyond her years, but her experiences in the southern continent seemed to have accelerated that development in ways I wasn't entirely comfortable with. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" I replied, moving to my desk and gesturing for her to take her usual seat in the comfortable chair I'd had specially designed for our evening conversations. "Reika has been making a lot of phone calls," Stella explained matter-of-factly, settling into her chair with the mug cradled carefully in both hands. And Rose keeps talking about market positioning and competitive advantages. And Rachel has been praying a lot more than usual. I sank into my own chair, marveling once again at my daughter's ability to read the emotional currents around her with frightening accuracy. You're very observant. That's not an answer, Stella pointed out with the kind of logical precision that reminded me uncomfortably of myself at that age. I leaned back in my chair, studying my daughter's earnest face. She deserved honesty, but how much truth could an 8-year-old handle about the realities of guild warfare and political maneuvering? There are 11 other organizations like Feroclism, I said carefully. They've seen what happened in the southern continent, and they're not happy about it. Some of them might try to challenge us. Challenge us like Maxwell did? Stella asked, her dark eyes reflecting an understanding that made my protective instincts flare. Possibly, I admitted, but they'll be smarter about it. They won't make the same mistakes Maxwell made. Stella sipped her hot chocolate thoughtfully. What mistakes did he make? The question surprised me with its sophistication. He acted out of anger instead of thinking clearly. He attacked when and where we wanted him to instead of choosing his own time and place. And he underestimated how much help we had. Help from who? I hesitated, considering how much to reveal. Remember the pretty dragon lady who visited us? Tiamat. Stella's eyes lit up with recognition. She was really nice. She gave me that butterfly necklace. She also helped us during the fight, I said carefully. Her authority made it harder for Maxwell to use his most powerful abilities. Without her help, the battle might have gone very differently. Will she help us again? It was the question I'd been avoiding asking myself. Tiamat's assistance had come at a price I was still paying, regular shipments of refined etherite for her research, along with detailed reports on our technological developments. The arrangement was mutually beneficial, but it also meant I couldn't rely on her intervention without considering her own interests. Maybe, I said honestly, but we can't count on it, which is why I'm making arrangements to keep you safe. I activated a holographic display that showed architectural plans for what appeared to be an underground facility of considerable size and complexity. Remember how Prince Ian's guards took you to those mountain bunkers during the attack? I'm having something similar built here, but much more advanced. The hologram rotated slowly, revealing multiple levels of defensive installations, living quarters that could house dozens of people, and technological systems that would make the facility completely self-sufficient for months if necessary. It's like a secret underground city, Stella observed with the kind of fascination that only children could muster for elaborate hiding places. Exactly, I confirmed. With entertainment systems, a fully equipped kitchen, a library, and even a small playground. If anything dangerous happens, you'll be able to stay there with Reika and the security team until it's safe to come out. Will you be there too? Stella asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Sometimes, I said honestly, but when there's fighting to be done, I need to be where I can protect everyone best. That means being out here, making sure the bad people can't hurt our family. Stella nodded with the grave acceptance of someone who had learned too young that the world contained people who would hurt children to achieve their goals. Like how you protected us from Maxwell. Exactly like that. I agreed, though privately I wondered if the next challenges would be as manageable as Maxwell had proven to be. But Daddy, Stella continued, her voice taking on a note of concern that made my chest tighten. If the other bad people are smarter than Maxwell, and if the dragon lady might not help us again, how will you win? It was the same question that had been keeping me awake at night for the past 2 weeks. The honest answer was that I wasn't entirely certain. Maxwell's defeat had been decisive, but it had also revealed the limitations of my current approach. Raw power and supernatural assistance wouldn't be sufficient against enemies who learned from his mistakes. By being smarter than they are, I said, though the words felt inadequate even as I spoke them. By planning ahead, by understanding what they want, and by making sure we're always one step ahead of their expectations. Like a chess game? I smiled at the comparison. Exactly like a chess game, except the pieces are real people and the stakes are much higher. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, father and daughter sharing an understanding that transcended our age difference. Outside the windows, Avalon's evening traffic flowed in orderly streams of light, the city continuing its daily rhythm despite the political earthquakes reshaping the continent's power structure. But beneath that peaceful surface, I could sense the tension building. Intelligence reports suggested that at least 3 of the remaining guilds were already coordinating their responses to Feroclism's absorption. They were calling it market stabilization, but I recognized the signs of coalition building when I saw them. The next phase would be more complex than anything I had faced so far. The defectors from Feroclism had given my enemies insight into my methods, making direct confrontation less viable. I would need to adapt, to find new approaches that couldn't be predicted or countered by conventional thinking. Daddy, Stella said eventually, breaking me out of my strategic reverie. When you're done with all the fighting, can we go somewhere peaceful again? Like the singing caves, but without the explosions. I felt my heart clench at the simple request. I promise, I said, meaning every word. When this is all over, we'll take a real vacation. Somewhere beautiful and safe, where the only excitement is whatever adventure you want to go on. Stella smiled, the first truly carefree expression I had seen from her since our return from the southern continent. I'd like that. As I watched my daughter's face light up with hope for a peaceful future, I made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices were required, I would ensure that future became reality. The remaining 11 guilds could adapt all they wanted, could learn from Maxwell's mistakes and prepare their defenses. It wouldn't matter. I had something they didn't understand, something that no amount of strategic planning could replicate. A reason to fight that transcended mere ambition or greed. They were protecting business interests and political positions. I was protecting my family. Chapter 717. Price of Victory 2. After tucking Stella into bed with an extra story and an additional security sweep of her room, I returned to my office to find that the rest of my inner circle had assembled for their evening strategic planning session. The transition from loving father to guild master was becoming easier with practice, though I sometimes wondered if that adaptability was something to be proud of or concerned about. Rose sat at the conference table with her characteristic poise, her auburn hair catching the room's ambient lighting, as she reviewed financial projections on her personal display. Elias occupied his usual position near the far end of the table, his meticulous notes and organizational materials spread before him in perfect order. As my secretary and administrative coordinator, he had been instrumental in managing the complex integration of Feroclism's assets. His attention to detail and bureaucratic expertise had made the absorption process far smoother than it might have been otherwise. Reka stood behind my chair, her violet eyes bright with the kind of anticipation that suggested she had been busy with intelligence gathering throughout the day. Her network of contacts had expanded significantly since our return from the southern continent, drawing on former Feroclism personnel who had chosen loyalty to her personally over institutional allegiance. The market reaction has been better than we anticipated, Rose reported as I took my seat at the head of the table. Feroclism's former clients are actually relieved to be dealing with us instead, especially the Imperial military since they don't have to worry about the contracts. Profitable anxiety, I observed. Fear of retribution kept clients paying premium rates for services they could have obtained elsewhere at lower cost. True, Rose agreed, but that same fear is now working in our favor. Former Feroclism clients view Ouroboros as a safer alternative, someone who eliminates threats rather than creating them. Elias looked up from his detailed integration reports, adjusting his glasses as he spoke. The bureaucratic aspects have proceeded remarkably smoothly. The legal transfer of assets, personnel contracts, and regulatory compliance issues that should have taken months to resolve were handled in weeks. Maxwell's abrupt departure simplified many procedures that typically involve extensive negotiations. I made a mental note to ensure Elias received appropriate recognition for his efforts. The administrative burden of absorbing an entire guild could have been overwhelming without his systematic approach to documentation and regulatory management. Political ramifications? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the broad outlines. Mixed, Rose admitted, her expression becoming more serious. The other great guilds are definitely taking notice, but their responses vary considerably. Some seem to be adopting defensive postures, while others appear to be forming alliances among themselves. Reka stepped forward, activating the room's tactical displays with a gesture. Intelligence suggests that at least 3 of the remaining guilds are already coordinating their responses to our expansion. They're calling it market stabilization, but it's clearly preparation for coordinated resistance. The holographic displays around us began showing communication intercepts, financial transaction analyses, and movement patterns that painted a picture of increasing cooperation among our potential enemies. Which guilds? I asked, though I had my suspicions. Luminalise, Skyvale, and Oristrade. Reka replied immediately. Energy, transportation, and commerce. They're trying to create a unified front that could control critical infrastructure if they coordinate properly. Natural alliance, Rose observed, her business-oriented mind immediately grasping the strategic implications. Luminalise provides the power, Skyvale handles logistics, and Oristrade manages the financial networks. Together, they could theoretically create significant pressure on our operations. I leaned back in my chair, studying the tactical displays as they updated in real time. The alliance made sense from their perspective. Each guild brought complementary capabilities that could theoretically create a monopoly on essential services. But they were still thinking in terms of conventional business warfare. They're making the same mistake Maxwell made, I said, though I kept my tone neutral, assuming that conventional business warfare will be sufficient. More importantly, they're still reacting to my moves instead of setting their own agenda. I activated the room's central holographic display, which began showing a 3-dimensional map of the central continent, marked with the locations and primary assets of all 11 remaining great guilds. Targeting Feroclism first wasn't a matter of convenience. I continued, watching as the display highlighted the power structures I had deliberately disrupted. They were the strongest of the diamond rank guilds in terms of pure combat capability. If I had left them for later, they would have become the natural leader of any coalition against us. By eliminating them early, I forced the remaining guilds into a defensive posture where they're constantly reacting to my initiatives. The defections from Feroclism, Rose said thoughtfully, they're strengthening our current enemies in the short term. True, I acknowledged. Luminalise gained key researchers, Skyvale absorbed logistics specialists, and Oristrade welcomed their financial analysts. But those defectors carry something more valuable than expertise. They carry the psychological impact of witnessing Feroclism's total destruction. Every day they work for their new employers. They're reminded that no guild is too strong to fall. Elias shifted in his seat, consulting his detailed personnel files. There's something else to consider from an administrative perspective. The defectors also carry institutional knowledge about how quickly we dismantled their previous employer. They've seen the efficiency of our operations firsthand, and that will influence their advice to their new employers. They'll be advocates for caution, for negotiated settlements rather than direct confrontation. An interesting point that I hadn't fully considered. Psychological warfare through unwilling agents. I mused. The defectors become a moderating influence precisely because they understand our operational capabilities. Exactly, Elias confirmed, tapping his stylus against his tablet. Fear of organizational dissolution can be as effective as loyalty, under the right circumstances. Reika pulled up additional intelligence reports, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as she compiled the latest information. However, we shouldn't underestimate the intelligence value they provide to our enemies. Several of the Feroclism defectors held positions that gave them insight into our operational methods, our technological capabilities, and our organizational structure. Specific concerns? I asked. They know about our Etherite integration programs, though not the full scope, Reika replied. They understand our general approach to personnel management and resource allocation. Most concerning, they have detailed knowledge of our southern continent relationships and the political arrangements that enabled our victory at Pyros. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. How much do they know about Tiamat's involvement? That's unclear, Reika admitted reluctantly. Most of Feroclism's forces were unconscious when the dragon's authority manifested, but some of their command staff remained aware during the early phases of the battle. They definitely know that external supernatural assistance was involved, though they may not understand the specific nature or source. The next phase will be more complex than Feroclism, I continued, pushing aside concerns about supernatural politics for the moment. The defectors have given our enemies insight into my methods, so direct confrontation is less viable. Instead of waiting for them to attack us, we're going to systematically dismantle their alliance before it can fully form. I gestured to the holographic display, which began highlighting specific targets in sequence. Orostrade first. Cut off their financial networks and the alliance loses its economic coordination. Then Skyvale, without reliable transportation, Luminalise becomes isolated. Finally Luminalise itself, and the entire coalition collapses. The Feroclism defectors will find themselves on the losing side once again. Timeline? Reika asked, though her tone suggested she was already mentally preparing deployment schedules. 3 months for the initial softening phase, I replied. Economic pressure, information warfare, targeted recruitment of their key personnel. We want them weakened and demoralized before we move to direct action. Economic warfare will be more complex against Orostrade, Rose warned. They specialize in financial manipulation. It's literally their core competency. Going against them on their chosen battlefield could be challenging. Which is why we won't fight them on their chosen battlefield, I replied. Orostrade's strength lies in traditional financial instruments, currency exchange, investment banking, contract negotiation. But they're vulnerable to disruption from outside their paradigm. I activated a subsidiary display that showed preliminary plans I had been developing in secret. Cryptocurrency systems based on Etherite verification protocols. Distributed ledger technologies that bypass traditional banking infrastructure. Automated trading algorithms that can respond faster than human decision-making. The room fell silent as they absorbed the implications. Rose was the first to speak, her voice carrying a note of impressed approval. You're not just planning to defeat them, she said. You're planning to make their entire industry obsolete. Exactly, I confirmed. Why fight an enemy in a battle they might win, when you can eliminate the battlefield entirely? And the other 8 guilds? Rose inquired. My smile carried the cold satisfaction of someone who had thought several moves ahead of his opponents. They'll be watching how we handle the alliance. Those who demonstrate wisdom will find themselves offered generous partnership terms. Those who choose resistance. I let the implication hang in the air, though everyone in the room understood perfectly what fate awaited organizations that followed Maxwell's example. There's one more thing, I said, my expression becoming more serious. The escalation means increased security risks for everyone close to us. I want comprehensive protection details for all family members, enhanced surveillance of our primary facilities, and full activation of our counterintelligence networks. Already in progress, Reika confirmed. The new security protocols will be in place within 48 hours. As the meeting concluded and my advisors departed to implement their respective aspects of the plan, I found myself once again standing at my office windows, looking out over the city that had become the center of my growing empire. 11 guilds still stood between me and absolute control of the continent's economic infrastructure. 11 organizations with centuries of accumulated power, wealth, and political connections. Under normal circumstances, the task would have been impossible for any single person to accomplish. But I had never intended to fight under normal circumstances. Choosing Feroclism as my first target had been the cornerstone of this entire campaign. By eliminating the strongest opposition early, I had demonstrated that raw power was insufficient protection against strategic thinking. The defectors now working for my enemies served as constant reminders of that lesson, undermining their new employer's confidence from within. Every day that passed, the remaining guilds grew more desperate, more willing to make the kinds of mistakes that would allow me to exploit their weaknesses. Feroclism's destruction hadn't just removed an enemy. It had psychologically damaged all of my future opponents. The real war begins now, Luna observed quietly. No, I corrected silently, watching the city lights flicker like stars in the gathering darkness. The real war began the moment I decided that the old system had to change. Everything else is just the inevitable conclusion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, and new opportunities to reshape the world according to my vision. But tonight, my daughter was safe in her bed. My allies were prepared for the battles ahead, and the pieces were in position for the next phase of my campaign. The guild grandmaster position was within reach. I just had to be willing to take it. Chapter 718, Extra Story Stella Luna. The house is really quiet when I tiptoe down the hallway, my bare feet making soft whisper sounds on the wooden floor. Usually around this time, Daddy is reading in his study or maybe making me a snack. But today everything feels different. Sleepy different, like the whole house is taking a nap. Maybe Daddy is tired. I think, clutching my stuffed butterfly, the one Princess Seraphina gave me, a little tighter against my chest. He's been working really hard lately. I've noticed things even though grown-ups think little kids don't pay attention. I've seen the way Daddy's shoulders get all tense when he thinks I'm not looking, and how sometimes he rubs his forehead like his head hurts. And last night, I woke up because I heard him talking in his study really late, his voice all serious and worried about things I don't understand. Important grown-up things that keep him awake. The scary part of my brain, the part that remembers the white rooms and the doctors who never smiled, starts whispering mean thoughts. What if he's getting sick of taking care of you? What if you're too much trouble? What if he's so tired because having a little girl is harder than he thought? I shake my head hard, making my hair swish. Daddy always tells me that the mean voice in my head is wrong, that it's just leftover scared feelings from the bad place. He says love doesn't get tired, even when people do. And I know it's true because I've seen how much everyone loves him. Daddy has so many people who love him. I remind myself, thinking about all the wonderful ladies who are part of our big, strange family. Princess Cecilia always makes sure he eats proper meals and doesn't work too late. Princess Seraphina sings to him when he's stressed, and she always brings me the prettiest toys. Princess Rachel teaches him new magic things and makes him laugh with her funny stories about her experiments. Then there's Rose, who isn't a princess but is just as important. She's the one who helped design my room and always knows exactly what books I might like. She has the kindest eyes and gives the best hugs, almost as good as Daddy's. But my favorite after Daddy is Reika. She was there the night Daddy saved me, fighting the scary people who wanted to take me back to the White Rooms. I remember how fierce she looked, protecting me and Daddy both, like a warrior from one of my storybooks. Now she visits almost every day, and she always asks about my drawings and listens to all my stories, even the silly ones. Reika understands about being scared, I think because she's told me stories about when she was little and afraid sometimes too. She knows how to make the scared feelings smaller. All of these wonderful ladies love Daddy so much, and they love me too because I'm his. Sometimes I see them looking at him with soft, worried expressions when they think he's working too hard or not sleeping enough. They take care of him in different ways, bringing him tea, organizing his papers, making sure he remembers to rest. But they're not here right now, I realize with a little frown. Princess Cecilia is at some important meeting, and Princess Seraphina is practicing for a concert. Rose is visiting her family, and Princess Rachel is doing magic research. Reika is helping with something in town. So it's just me and Daddy today, and he's so tired he fell asleep in the afternoon. I pause outside his bedroom door, which is slightly open. I can hear soft breathing inside, the kind that means someone is really, truly asleep. Not the fake sleep the guards used to do at the facility, where they were always watching even with their eyes closed. This is the peaceful kind of sleep that happens when people feel safe. Daddy feels safe here. I realize with a warm feeling in my chest. Just like I do. Carefully, I peek around the door. Daddy is lying on top of the covers, still wearing his day clothes like he just laid down for a minute and fell asleep by accident. His dark hair is all messy, and there are little worry lines around his eyes even in sleep. He looks younger when he's sleeping, less like the powerful person everyone says he is and more like just Daddy. He really is tired, I think sadly. All this grown-up stuff is making him sleepy in the daytime. I remember when I first came home with him, how I was scared to sleep by myself because I kept thinking the doctors would come take me back. Daddy slept in the chair next to my bed for weeks, even though it made his neck hurt, just so I wouldn't be afraid. He said families take care of each other, especially when someone is scared or tired. Maybe it's my turn to take care of him. I think about what each of his girlfriends would do if they were here. Princess Cecilia would probably tuck a blanket around him and make sure the room was the perfect temperature. Princess Seraphina would hum a soft lullaby to help him sleep deeper. Princess Rachel would check to make sure he wasn't having nightmares with some kind of magic. Rose would bring him a cup of his favorite tea for when he wakes up. And Reika would just sit quietly nearby, keeping watch to make sure nothing disturbed his rest. I can't do magic or make tea or sing like they can, I think, but I can keep him company. I can make sure he's not alone. Very quietly, I slip into the room. The afternoon sunlight is streaming through the windows, making everything golden and warm. It's the kind of light that makes you want to curl up like a cat and just be cozy. I remember Reika telling me once that sometimes the best way to take care of someone is just to be near them, to let them know they're loved and safe. I climb onto the big bed as carefully as I can, trying not to bounce or make the mattress move too much. Daddy doesn't wake up, just keeps breathing that slow, peaceful way. Up close, I can see how long his eyelashes are, and the little scar on his chin that Princess Serafina says he got from being young and foolish. He takes such good care of everyone else. I think, settling down next to him with my butterfly clutched in my arms. But who takes care of him when his girlfriends are busy? In the facility, no one ever took care of me when I was tired or scared. If I cried, they gave me medicine that made me feel fuzzy and strange. If I was sick, they just adjusted the machines and told me to be stronger. But Daddy brings me warm milk when I can't sleep, and reads me stories when I'm sad, and holds me when the nightmares come. Maybe that's what families do. I think sleepily as the warm sunlight and Daddy's steady breathing make my own eyes feel heavy. Maybe we take turns being the one who needs taking care of. I think about how Princess Cecilia always checks on me before bedtime, making sure I have everything I need. How Princess Serafina teaches me new songs and tells me I have a pretty voice even when I sing off-key. How Princess Rachel shows me her magic butterflies and lets me help with the safe experiments. How Rose reads me stories and helps me pick out clothes that make me feel like a real little girl instead of a scary science project. How Reika sits with me when I have bad dreams and tells me I'm brave and strong. They all love me because I'm Daddy's daughter, I realize. And they love Daddy so much. We're all one big family that takes care of each other. I scoot a little closer, close enough that I can feel the warmth from his body but not touching in case it wakes him up. He smells like the safe smell that means home, a little like the soap he uses, a little like the coffee he drinks in the mornings, and underneath it all just the smell that's purely Daddy. This is nice, I think drowsily. Just being close to him, knowing he's safe and I'm safe and we're together. My eyelids are getting really heavy now. The afternoon light is so golden and sleepy, and Daddy's breathing is like the most peaceful lullaby in the world. All the worry feelings from earlier are melting away, replaced by the warm, fuzzy feeling I get when I'm exactly where I belong. Maybe when we wake up, I'll make him a picture, I plan sleepily. Something happy to make him smile. Maybe all of us together. Me and Daddy and Princess Cecilia and Princess Serafina and Princess Rachel and Rose and Reika, all having a picnic in a garden with butterflies. Just before I drift off completely, I feel Daddy's arm move slightly, settling gently around me even in his sleep, like his body knows I'm there and wants to keep me safe, even when he's dreaming. He really does love me, I think with a smile, snuggling closer to his warmth. Even when he's asleep, he wants to protect me. The mean voice in my head tries one more time to whisper scary things, but it's getting quieter now, drowned out by the steady beat of Daddy's heart and the feeling of being completely, totally safe. This is what love feels like. I think as sleep pulls me down into soft, golden dreams. It feels like always having someone who wants you close, even when they're tired. It feels like having a whole family of people who choose to take care of each other. And as I fall asleep in the warm afternoon light, surrounded by the safe smell of home and the gentle rhythm of Daddy's breathing, I know that tomorrow when we wake up, we'll still be together, still be a family. And maybe Princess Cecilia will come visit and bring cookies, or Reika will take me to the garden to look for real butterflies. Always and forever. I whisper in my dreams, the words Daddy always says when he tucks me in at night. Always and forever. Chapter 719. Digital Gold, 1. The morning after our strategic planning session, I stood in the primary development laboratory of Ouroboros, watching as our finest engineers made the final adjustments to what would revolutionize the Empire's existing financial infrastructure. The Etherite-enhanced Imperial cryptocurrency security system hummed with barely contained energy, its crystalline processing cores glowing with the distinctive blue light that had become synonymous with technological revolution. Final diagnostics complete, reported Dr. Sarah Chun, our lead cryptographic engineer. Her hands danced across holographic interfaces as streams of data flowed around us like living mathematics. The Etherite verification protocols are operating at 99.7% efficiency. Transaction security is now absolute, and processing speed has increased by a factor of 10,000 over current Imperial systems. I nodded approvingly, though my mind was already racing ahead to the broader implications. What we had created would transform Imperial coin from a successful digital currency into the backbone of continental commerce. Every traditional bank, every trading house, every financial institution that had built their power on controlling payment processing was about to discover that their intermediary services were no longer necessary. This is going to shake the foundations of how business is conducted. Luna observed from within my consciousness, her mental voice carrying anticipation. That's the point, I replied silently. Orostrade controls 60% of continental financial infrastructure. Time to make that infrastructure obsolete. Helena Voss, the legendary guild master of Orostrade, wouldn't see this coming. She had spent decades building relationships with traditional banking systems, never imagining that the entire paradigm could be bypassed overnight. Sir, My phone chimed with an incoming priority call from the Imperial Palace. Cecilia appeared on the phone, her regal bearing somehow making even the casual clothes she wore seem formal. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant style that emphasized her natural authority, while her crimson eyes held the kind of political intelligence that had made her such a valuable ally. "Arthur," she said with the warm smile she reserved for private moments. "The council session went exactly as planned. Chancellor Amelia presented your security enhancements as critical infrastructure improvements for imperial financial systems. The vote was unanimous in favor of official adoption. Perfect. With imperial backing, Orostrade's traditional advantages would become liabilities." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "Your support and Chancellor Amelia's expertise made this possible." "Our pleasure," Cecilia replied, "though I suspect Helena Voss won't appreciate the implications when she realizes what's happening." After Cecilia ended the call, I activated our secure Western Continent link. Prince Jean Ashbluff and Callie materialized as holographic projections, their first joint operation about to begin. "Status report," I requested, noting how naturally they stood together. Jin's black hair impeccably styled and his black eyes reflecting strategic intelligence, while Callie's dark hair and focused expression spoke to operational readiness. "Western financial networks are prepared for integration," Jean reported. "I've coordinated with 12 major noble houses to serve as early adopters. The moment your enhanced imperial cryptocurrency launches, we'll have immediate legitimacy across the entire Western continent. Security protocols are in place," Callie added, her tone professional but carrying an undertone that suggested she was impressed by Jin's thorough preparation. "Any attempt by Orostrade to interfere with Western operations will meet immediate resistance." Their coordination was flawless, and I noticed the subtle glances they exchanged. Professional respect beginning to develop into something deeper. "Execute the Western integration," I commanded. Helena Voss is about to discover that her traditional banking relationships can't compete with imperial mandate and technological superiority. Dr. Chun. Initiate the global launch sequence. The enhanced imperial cryptocurrency went live across all Ouroboros and former Ferroclism facilities simultaneously. Within hours, transaction volumes exceeded what most traditional banks processed in a month. But the real shock came when major corporations began adopting the system, drawn by the combination of absolute security and imperial endorsement. 6 hours later, Helena Voss called. The holographic projection showed exactly what I expected. A woman in her apparent late 40s with silver hair and steel-gray eyes that had seen decades of financial warfare. Her expensive business suit and composed bearing radiated the confidence of someone who had never lost a significant financial battle. "Arthur Nightingale," she said, her voice carrying imperial court precision. "Your enhancement to the imperial cryptocurrency system is impressive." "Guild Master Voss," I replied courteously. "I'm honored that Orostrade has taken notice." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, I always pay attention when someone attempts to eliminate traditional banking services. Your Etherite security is clever. Absolute protection, quantum encryption, impossible processing speeds. Very impressive for someone so young." The Empire Council seemed to agree. "Yes, the unanimous vote," Helena said, her tone cooling. "Quite the political achievement. But you've made a fundamental error, Mr. Nightingale. Finance isn't just about transaction security, it's about complex services. Loans, investments, international transfers, regulatory compliance. You've built beautiful technology, but I control the institutions that provide essential financial services." She gestured beyond her projection. "In the past 6 hours, I've spoken with 8 continental banking consortiums, 12 major corporations, and 4 allied guilds. They're all concerned about maintaining proper institutional oversight for major transactions." I felt the cold knot of recognition. Helena was more sophisticated than Maxwell. She wasn't going to attack my technology directly, but rather isolate it by maintaining control over complex financial instruments. "By tomorrow," she continued with satisfaction, "there will be recommendations that major transactions continue using traditional banking oversight. Your revolutionary technology will be relegated to small personal payments while serious commerce flows through my networks." It was masterful and exactly what I had expected. "An impressive demonstration of Orostrade's influence," I said, allowing concern to color my voice. "I can see why you've maintained your position for so long." Her smile widened, interpreting my tone as defeat. "Perhaps we can discuss partnership terms." "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I was impressed by your ability to coordinate such a response in 6 hours. It must have required significant political capital." Her smile faltered as she caught the implication. "The thing about government authority, Guild Master Voss, is that it flows through specific channels." I activated displays showing imperial documentation, such as Chancellor Amelia's directive establishing enhanced imperial cryptocurrency as the preferred standard for all government transactions, or Crown Princess Cecilia's announcement that the imperial treasury is transitioning to direct cryptocurrency systems. Helena paled as she realized the scope of imperial backing. "You see," I continued, "while you were leveraging private relationships, we were implementing government policy. But just to ensure clarity about your position," I displayed financial records that made her face go ashen. 3 days ago, you placed a 50 million credit bet against your own guild's stock price. Interesting hedge for someone confident in traditional banking's future. The call ended abruptly, but I wasn't concerned. Helena would be back within hours, and when she returned, it would be to negotiate rather than threaten. The opening move was complete. Chapter 720. Digital Gold, 2. Helena Voss returned exactly 14 hours later, and the transformation was remarkable. Gone was the polished confidence of yesterday, replaced by barely controlled desperation. Her silver hair was still perfectly styled, but her steel-gray eyes reflected sleepless calculation and what appeared to be the beginning stages of genuine panic. "Mr. Nightingale," she said without preamble, her voice carrying a slight tremor that she was clearly trying to suppress. "I believe we got off on the wrong foot." I leaned back in my office chair, studying her projection with the patience of someone holding all advantages. The woman before me was a masterclass in barely contained collapse. Every gesture calculated to project control while her micro-expressions betrayed the turmoil beneath. "I'm always willing to discuss reasonable arrangements, Guild Master Voss," I replied, deliberately emphasizing her title. Her composed mask slipped at my emphasis, a reminder that her position was far less secure than 24 hours ago. Behind her, I could see her office, but something was different. The awards and commendations were still there, but I noticed several expensive artifacts were missing from their usual positions. Emergency liquidation of personal assets had already begun. "I may have overreacted to your cryptocurrency enhancements," she continued carefully, each word chosen with the precision of someone walking through a minefield. "Upon reflection, there's certainly room for improved imperial financial infrastructure." "How generous of you to say so." If Helena noticed the dry irony in my tone, she chose to ignore it completely. The desperation was making her focus purely on survival rather than pride. "In fact," Helena pressed on, leaning forward with an intensity that spoke to sleepless hours spent calculating increasingly impossible scenarios, "I think there are opportunities for cooperation. Oristrade has extensive experience with international finance, regulatory compliance, institutional relationships. We could provide valuable support for global adoption." I made a show of considering her proposal, though we both knew this conversation had only one possible outcome. The psychological pressure was fascinating to observe. Helena was a brilliant strategist being forced to negotiate from a position of complete weakness, something she had probably never experienced in her entire career. "What sort of cooperation did you have in mind?" I asked, curious to see how far she would debase herself. "Full partnership," she said, and the words came out slightly too fast, revealing the desperation beneath her professional facade. "Oristrade would serve as primary institutional sponsor for your enhanced cryptocurrency. Our endorsement would eliminate any remaining regulatory concerns while your technology would modernize our service offerings. Think of it as a merger of equals." The phrase merger of equals hung in the air between us, and we both knew it was a complete fiction. Under normal circumstances, it might have been a reasonable proposal. Unfortunately for Helena, I had no interest in normal circumstances, and she was in no position to demand equal treatment. "I'm flattered by the offer," I said, allowing a note of what might have been genuine consideration to enter my voice. "But I'm curious about the timing. Yesterday you were quite confident that institutional pressure could undermine adoption. What changed so dramatically?" Helena's facade cracked further, revealing the strain beneath her professional demeanor. I could see her calculating, trying to determine how much I actually knew versus how much I was guessing. "Sometimes, circumstances evolve," she said carefully. "New information becomes available. Strategic priorities shift based on changing market conditions." "Ah yes, new information." I activated holographic displays showing financial records that made her face drain of color completely. "Such as discovering that your gambling activities extend far beyond simple stock speculation. The data that materialized around us was devastating in its scope and detail. 5 years of increasingly large wagers on everything from commodity futures to political elections. What had started as occasional high-stakes betting had evolved into compulsive risk-taking on increasingly exotic propositions. Property development projects, merger outcomes, weather patterns affecting agricultural yields. I read from the meticulously compiled files. Quite impressive in its variety, though I noticed the betting amounts have been escalating rapidly over the past 18 months. Helena's hands trembled slightly as she processed the full scope of my knowledge. "Those are private transactions. Made through Oristrade's own financial networks," I interrupted smoothly. "Using insider information from your guild master position to gain advantages in your betting. Very clever, actually, until the amounts became large enough to attract attention from my intelligence analysts. The implications were clear to both of us. Gambling using privileged information wasn't just a personal scandal. It was a criminal offense that would destroy her career and likely result in imperial prosecution. The really fascinating part," I continued conversationally, watching her face grow paler with each revelation, "is how you've been financing the larger bets. Did you think no one would notice that Oristrade's discretionary investment funds have been consistently underperforming market benchmarks? Or that certain high-value assets have been quietly liquidated to cover your mounting losses?" Helena's professional mask collapsed entirely, revealing the raw panic beneath. "You can't prove." "Actually, I can." Additional displays materialized, showing forensic financial analysis that laid out her embezzlement in meticulous detail. Reka's people are quite thorough when they set their minds to it. We have transaction records, communication intercepts, even security footage of you accessing restricted accounts during non-business hours. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Helena had been systematically embezzling from her own guild to fund an increasingly destructive gambling addiction. The amounts involved were staggering, enough to destabilize Orrestrade's operational capacity if the truth became public. Helena slumped in her chair, the weight of complete exposure finally crushing her shoulders. What do you want? I want Orrestrade, I replied simply. Complete transfer of all assets, personnel, and operational control to Ouroboros. In exchange, your gambling activities and their funding sources remain a private matter between us. That's everything I've built, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Everything you've built was funded with embezzled guild resources, I pointed out with matter-of-fact precision. I'm offering you the opportunity to walk away with your freedom and dignity intact. Many people in your position wouldn't receive such generous terms. Helena stared beyond the holographic display, her mind clearly processing the complete destruction of her life's work. The silence stretched between us for several long minutes as she contemplated a future that no longer included the empire she had spent decades constructing. If I refuse? She asked eventually, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Then by tomorrow morning, detailed financial records will be delivered to the Imperial Financial Crimes Commission, the media, and every major financial institution on the continent. I replied with matter-of-fact certainty. Your gambling addiction will become public knowledge, along with evidence of embezzlement and insider trading spanning multiple years. I continued. After which, Orrestrade will collapse within weeks as clients flee and regulatory authorities freeze all accounts pending investigation. You'll face criminal prosecution, personal bankruptcy, and complete professional ruin. And I'll still acquire Orrestrade's assets, though probably at a significant discount through the Imperial Receivership Courts. Helena closed her eyes, her breathing shallow as she confronted the reality of her situation. When she opened them again, hollow resignation had replaced everything else. How long do I have to decide? You've already decided, I said gently. You called me because you know there's only one choice that preserves anything of your legacy. The question is whether you want this transition to happen quietly and professionally, or if you prefer the public alternative. Another long silence filled only by the soft hum of our communication systems. Then Helena nodded slowly, the movement carrying the weight of absolute defeat. What are your terms for the transfer? Generous, under the circumstances. I activated legal documents that Elias had prepared based on several contingency scenarios. Full asset transfer to Ouroboros, but you retain a significant financial settlement and advisory position if you choose to remain involved. Your gambling debts will be settled from guild reserves, and we'll structure the transition to look like a voluntary merger rather than a forced acquisition. Helena reviewed the terms with mechanical precision, like someone going through motions without any emotional investment in the outcome. And my private activities remain private, though I would strongly recommend that part of your settlement funds go toward addressing the underlying issues that led to this situation. For the first time since our conversation began, Helena showed something resembling genuine emotion, a flash of what might have been gratitude for the absence of vindictive cruelty. I'll need some time to review the legal documentation with my advisors, she said quietly. Of course, take all the time you need, I replied. The documents will be available for signature whenever you're ready. The call ended, leaving me alone in my office contemplating the strangely anticlimactic nature of Orrestrade's defeat. No dramatic battles, no supernatural interventions, no technology that defied the laws of physics. Simply the methodical exploitation of human weakness and the inevitable consequences of poor personal choices. 30 minutes later, my communication system chimed with an incoming priority message from Helena Voss. The signature on the transfer documents was accompanied by a brief note. Effective immediately. Thank you for your discretion. Just like that, Orrestrade, one of the 12 great guilds, controller of 60% of continental financial infrastructure, became part of the Ouroboros Empire. Almost too easy, Luna observed from within my consciousness. Helena compromised herself years before we met, I replied silently. We just had to recognize the opportunity and apply the right pressure at the right moment. My communication device chimed again, this time with a call from Rose. Her auburn hair was disheveled from what had clearly been a night of intensive work, but her eyes were bright with excitement. Arthur, the market reaction is extraordinary, she reported, her voice carrying the kind of energy that came from witnessing history in the making. Orrestrade's announcement of voluntary integration with Ouroboros has triggered mass adoption of the enhanced imperial cryptocurrency systems. Major institutions are scrambling to establish relationships rather than risk being left behind by the transition. And the remaining great guilds? Rose's expression became more serious as she consulted additional reports. Panic across the board. Emergency conferences between all remaining guild leadership. They finally understand that you're not just competing with them, you're systematically eliminating the existing power structure. I nodded thoughtfully. Helena's surrender had indeed sent a clear message to the remaining guilds, though not necessarily the message I wanted them to receive. Fear could make enemies more dangerous as well as more cooperative. Prepare for rapid escalation, I instructed. The remaining guild masters are all competent strategists who won't make Helena's mistakes. They'll coordinate their responses and probably attempt to force a confrontation before we can fully consolidate Orrestrade's resources. Already in progress, Rose confirmed. Though I have to say, having absorbed 2 of the 12 great guilds is going to change everything about how the remaining 10 approach their planning. After Rose ended the call, I stood at my office windows, looking out over Avalon as the city continued its evening routines. Somewhere in those glittering lights, millions of people were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that the fundamental structure of continental finance had just shifted beneath their feet. 2 of the 12 great guilds down, 10 to go. But Helena's personal weaknesses had made this easier than it should have been. The remaining guilds would be more careful, more disciplined, and infinitely more dangerous. The real test was coming.